Casey, are you ready to go? All right. We're going to call to order the Board of Adjustments meeting for Thursday, March 16th, 2023. It is 1:01. Before we start, and I will ask everyone, this is the first meeting I've had to chair, so it's the biggest crowd I've had to deal with for a little while. So I appreciate your patience and understanding for this. But before we started, I have to read an introduction to you. Hearings before the Board of Adjustment are quasi-judicial in nature. Decisions of the board are based on the record of these proceedings. To grant a variance requires a concurrent vote of 4/5 of the members of the board. To reverse or modify the determination of administrative officials requires a simple majority. Evidence submitted to the board for review become part of the record. Appeals for the board's decisions are to the Superior Court and are based on the record. Appeals must be filed within 30 days of the date of the filing of the board's order in the Planning Division. A hearing before the board is conducted in accordance with the rules of procedure. Those who want to testify in a case are sworn as witness. The chairperson will recognize who wants to testify or their attorney or representation for evidence during the hearing. To ensure that all testimony is properly recorded, please come forward to address the board. State your name, address, and speak clearly. All right, before we get started, we need to swear in all those who will be speaking today.
I'm going to ask everyone to stand, staff, applicants, members of the public that think they'll speak or may wish to speak. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Good.
All right. Thank you. The item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from the February 16th, 2023 meeting. I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion we approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Those are approved. We'll move on to old business. It's related to 301 Talon Drive. I believe this is a request is being withdrawn at this time.
Yes, sir. The applicant has requested to withdraw this item.
Make a motion to withdraw item 1, 301 Toulon Drive.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? That passes. Before we move on, I'll refer to.
Yes, sir. We have an uncontested continuance request at item 9, 1601 South College Road. The applicant's attorney is present. I'm not sure what date certain we're looking for.
Good afternoon. Amy Schaefer on behalf of the applicant. We are requesting, if we could do your May meeting. I'm sorry, I don't have that in front
That'll
of
be
me.
May 18th.
The May 18th meeting.
Could I get a motion for that continue?
I'd like to make a motion to continue item 9, 1601 South College Road to our May 18 Board of Adjustment meeting.
I'll second.
Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? That passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anything?
I believe those are all the only uncontested continuance requests. There is a continuance request at item 5, but that is being contested by the applicant.
Okay. Right.
So we will proceed as you wish.
Okay. All right, then we'll proceed on with our agenda. The next agenda item is 2030 Bay Colony Lane. This is a variance to require a perimeter buffer in the rear yard of the property dimension standards in the R20 residential district pursuant to City Code Chapter 18, Land Development Code, Section 18-436, subsection C and 3. Right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Subject property 2030 Bay Colony Lane is in a R20 Legacy Residential District. The subject property is Lot 46, located in Bay Colony Subdivision, a performance residential subdivision located within the parent subdivision of Landfall. The site contains approximately 11,572 square feet and is subject to a 30-foot perimeter buffer along the rear northern property line. The site currently contains a single-family structure that is 2,096 square feet, and city code changed such that the performance residential is no longer a development option for new subdivisions. Section 18-436, cluster development, sets forth similar standards for alternative site layouts for the purpose of minimizing infrastructure needs, protecting environmental areas, and also maximizing open spaces. The current city code requires a 25-foot perimeter buffer for the periphery of the cluster subdivision. The lot is bordered to the rear by another performance residential subdivision, Muirfield Phase 2. The purpose of the perimeter buffer is to protect adjacent single-dwelling uses from high-density residential. In this case, the adjacent residential now is the same density, or has the same density allowance as the current property. So on January 17, 2023, planning staff accepted an application for a variance of 5 feet to the required rear yard setback in the R20 Legacy District, and also a 10-foot variance to the required perimeter buffer for a cluster subdivision to construct an addition within the required setback and the required buffer. The applicant states that based on the interior layout of the existing house and the footprint of the house, that the left rear area of the property as the only option for their addition. They also include that due to the irregularity to the rear property line, the buffer is closer to the existing houses than on other lots in the subdivision, and due to this peculiarity, the proposed addition would extend into the buffer and rear setback. Should the board grant the variance request, the applicant will be required to record a revised plat to show that the perimeter buffer easement has been reduced or has been eliminated. This case is subject to the 4 findings of fact, and I ask that this presentation and all materials be submitted into the record. The applicant is present and staff is able to answer questions if needed.
Does anyone have any questions at this time? All right, would the applicant like to come forward?
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Levine. I reside at 2030 Bay Colony Lane. As was stated on our application, this hardship results from conditions that are really unique to our lot. Our lot is irregularly shaped, and it's different than all other lots in our neighborhood, Bay Colony. Most of them are rectangular, except ours has the cutout, as you saw on the diagram. If our rear property line actually followed the contour of the other lots in the neighborhood, the proposed addition would actually not go into the buffer zone. In addition, if our lot were actually rectangular in terms of size, the proposed addition would be about 59 feet from the property line or 29 feet from the buffer. So again, it's the shape of the lot that really is a bit problematic for us here. When we look at the size of the buffer zone, the addition would take up less than 5% of the total buffer zone. So it's a very relatively small part of the buffer zone. And finally, and I think just as important, the proposed addition would still be 20 feet from the rear property line. And behind the rear property line actually is a driveway, the foot of a driveway. The house that's back there sits off to the left. So it's quite a distance to the house back there. Right now, there is a berm there. The berm has a lot of mature shrubs and trees, so you can't even see through. If you like, I have pictures of what that looks like and where the other house is, if that would be of help to the board.
Do you have them with you?
Yes.
We can go ahead and pass those through so we can look at those. You can continue. We'll look at those while you're.
Okay, actually, that's the
That's
end
it?
of my
Okay.
remarks. I'm
All
happy-
right.
happy to answer any
All right.
questions.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? All right. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Then we'll go, is there any other evidence to be presented by any other parties related to this matter? All right, being the case, we will open up. Does the city have anything additional? I'm sorry, Catherine, I saw you stand up, so.
No, sir, I was just trying to improve the audio situation.
I got you, thank you. We'll go ahead and we're going to move to the evidentiary hearing. We're going to open up to those non-parties that would like to address the public. If anyone has anything to provide that's competent of material fact and substantial evidence related to this matter, please come forward at this time. Being that none, we'll move forward. Is there any questions of, guess nothing else to go forward with the evidentiary hearing? We'll close the evidentiary hearing and move on to, if there's any additional information from the applicant or from the city. All right, we can close out that and move on to deliberations. Anyone have thoughts or questions for a discussion?
I think this is a reasonable request because of the shape of the lot. It is a unique lot. I think we would have to go through the 4 findings of fact to make sure everything lines up there, but I do feel like the request is very reasonable considering the lot shape.
I agree. I think it meets the 4 findings of fact. I mean, particularly item 2, conditions are peculiar to the property, which is the cutout in the rear, and hardship certainly did not result from actions taken by the applicant. And I think the variance is certainly consistent with spirit, purpose, and intent. And really, item 1, an unnecessary hardship because of the irregular side shape of the lot, and that being the only place that could be put for the addition, I think it meets item number 1, too.
All right, and would you like to put that in the form of a motion?
I would like to propose a motion on 2030 Bay Colony Lane that the variance be approved as requested based on the 4 findings of fact.
I'll second.
All right, with all that said, I vote, is anyone, all of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes unanimously. We'll move on to item number 3. Item number 3 involves 715 Greenfield Street. It's a variance to a fence height and location in the urban mixed-use district. I'll recognize the city. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This is BATV 4323, request for a variance at 715 Greenfield Street. Subject property is zoned UMX, urban mixed use, and contains an existing 37,478 square foot building, previously the location of True Colors. On or about September 13th, 2022, zoning officer Cynthia Whitfield conducted an inspection of the property via a complaint and determined that the existing fence was in violation of the UMX standards. Land Development Code Section 1844A7 states in front of buildings, fence height shall not exceed 4 feet. The lot has frontage on Greenfield, South 8th, South 7th, and Martin Streets, as the parcel contains the entire block. Per Section 18663B3 of the Land Development Code, to determine setback requirements on corner lots and through lots, all sides of a lot adjacent to streets shall be considered frontage, and the required setbacks for that district shall apply. On January 20th, 2023, planning staff accepted an application for a variance to Land Development Code Section 18-44A7 to allow an approximately 8-foot 2-inch fence in front of the building, a variance of 4 feet 2 inches. The applicant states that compliance with the UMX fencing regulations would hinder the ability to maintain a safe environment for customers and employees. This matter is set for hearing before the Board of Adjustment today, March 16th, 2023. This case is subject to the 4 findings of fact I have placed on the screen in front of you. I ask that the presentation and all materials be submitted to the record. I'm available for any questions, and the applicant is here as well.
Does anyone have any questions right now? All right, we'll move on to ask that if the applicant would like to make a statement.
Good afternoon. My name's George Taylor. I'm manager of Spark 715, which owns the facility. We purchased this.
Sorry. We just need your address for the record also.
Home address?
Yes, please.
813 Swiftwind Place. Wilmington.
All right, thank you.
We purchased the building back in 2019, and as you probably know, it was a dilapidated building that had been vacant for decades. At that time, there was a fence of approximately the same size and approximately the same area that this existing fence is in. We knocked that fence down, invested about $12 million into the building to renovate it, and put a fence up, like I said, in roughly the same place. And so we thought that would, we didn't see a problem with that. In addition, as was mentioned, like the primary reason for the height of the fence is a safety issue for employees and customers that were coming to that brew pub and to that facility. As you probably are aware, there's a lot of gun violence in that area unfortunately, that hasn't changed a whole lot over the past couple of months. In addition, one of the reasons we have that fence there is we're in really close proximity to the Good Shepherd House. And we're huge fans of the Good Shepherd House, but it brings with it a very large homeless community that's in that area. On many occasions prior to that fence going up, we had to call the police to deal with what was going on there. If we were to put a fence in our property that was 5 foot tall or whatever the ordinance is looking for, people would be climbing over it. As it is, as recently as last month, we had homeless folks that had broken in through the fence and put up tents and camps and all that sort of thing. And so without that fence, we'd have a really difficult time in that neighborhood maintaining safety, maintaining order for what we're trying to accomplish. And so for that reason, we think that and the fact that it was there for decades prior to us moving in, we feel like it's a reasonable request to ask for a variance. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Taylor? All right, thank you, sir.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, we will, is there any other evidence from the city? Or, okay, we'll move on to the evidentiary hearing, and again, we'll remind that this is for information that's competent and material and substantial evidence related to the matter. I'd ask anyone come forward that'd like to speak regarding this matter. Being that we see none, we'll go ahead and close the evidentiary hearing. Is there anything from the city in regards to this? Any more information from the applicant? That being the case, we'll move forward and see what the will of the group is on this. Anything for discussion?
I think my main concern is it's going to set precedents for other businesses or even residential areas within that area, because then everybody would have an 8-foot fence in front of their house. That's my main concern with this one.
What I see, there's some, it says not in front of the building, and I understand this isn't in front of the building, it's more to the side, but yes, it is to the front. So, some semantics there. Really, there's not that much of a setback off the front. I mean, what does that look like in that picture right there? Maybe 15 feet, if that. So, given the substantial beautification, if you look at the findings of fact, I mean, following the spirit of the LDC and following the spirit of the code, like significant improvements to that property and to that area. So, I mean, if we follow the 4 findings of facts, could we put that back up there, please? So to me, it's, the variance request falls clearly within number 4. Number 3, they followed the existing fence that was there. There's some, looking at that, there's strict application and the hardship given the security problems in that area. So, I mean, we're falling within 3 of the findings of fact, given the security, the existing, and the neighborhood that it's in.
But I think that it's a unique property. And the fence that's there now is really a replacement of a fence that was already there. And I do think I think number one is the finding of fact that we may have been missing, but I think there is an unnecessary hardship to remove the fence and put up a 4-foot fence, which really would not accomplish what it was there for. And since each case stands on its own merit, I think we're okay on the precedence issue as well. So,
I mean, I tend to think that the situation and the requirements, we would end up having this type of fence down the entire part of that area. So I go with the majority, but I do want to say that we have these, we put these in place so that we preserve, we don't have everything behind fence. So we literally, you think about that, everyone up and down that, if they were worried in the conditions of the crime, and that is the mechanism to prevent crime, is a fence. So that, I just put that out there as my thought. But I will entertain if someone has a motion for or against.
I would make a motion that we approve the variance requested for 715 Greenfield Street based on the 4 findings of fact.
All right, there is a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, and that being the case, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I'm opposed.
I'm
Nay.
opposed.
That being the case, it's,
Could we do, how many was that, 3 and 2?
all those in favor, would you please raise your
Raise
hand?
your hands. Okay,
All those opposed, raise their hand.
all right, then the motion fails.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to item number 4. Item number 4 involves the property located at 917 North Fifth Avenue. This is a request for a variance for the rear setback requirement to the R3 residential district pursuant to City Code, Chapter 18, Land Development Codes, Section 18-28 and 18-422. Recognize the city?
The subject property is zoned R3 Residential District and is currently vacant. The owner wishes to construct an 816-square-foot single-family dwelling on the property, which is a permitted use in the R3 district. Land Development Code, Section 18-28A2, allows properties that are located in the R5 or R3 zoning districts to reduce the front and rear setback within 5 feet of the average established setback on the same block face. The block face is encompassed with lots ranging from 132 to 165 feet in length, with the exception of the subject property and the lot to the north being 45 feet in length. Land Development Code Section 18422 allows porches, stoops, decks, terraces, balconies, and associated stairs to encroach up to 8 feet into a front setback, and the encroachments shall be at least 75% open on all sides, not abutting a building facade. The owner has proposed a front porch and steps to encroach into that setback 6 feet. On January 24th, 2023, planning staff accepted an application for a 7-foot variance to Land Development Code Section 18-28, which requires a minimum rear setback of 15 feet and to allow a setback for the principal structure of 8 feet. The applicant states that the property dimensions are peculiar and unusual for the block as the property is wide and shallow. The applicant further states that they do not plan to build to the extent of the allowable setbacks on the sides, as they would like green space and gardens. Additionally, per Map Book 71, page 324, a 10-foot wide easement, also known as ABC Alley, is located on the subject property, further restricting the buildable area. This matter is set for hearing for the Board of Adjustment today, March 16th. This case is subject to the 4 findings of fact, which are on the screen for you. I'm available for any questions, and the applicant is here as well. And I also ask that this is submitted into the record.
All right, thank you. Anyone have any questions? All right, thank you very much. We'll ask if the applicant is present and would like to present any further information.
You're not going to be able to see me. Hello, my name is Mary Jean McCarthy Biles. Have to throw the McCarthy in there because of St. Patrick's Day weekend. And we're hoping to be a resident
Ma'am,
at
I'm sorry, just for the record, we just need your legal address.
917 North Fifth Avenue.
All right, thank you. All right, you can go ahead.
We're asking for the variance for the setbacks because of the odd shape of the lot. The property right next to us actually builds right up to the sidewalk, and the back of it actually goes within 5 feet of the back fence, or the back property line. The property behind us, there's a side of a building, there's no windows or doors on it, it's just a blank building. And then the front of the building, because the house next to us goes all the way up to the sidewalk, we would look like we would be set back. We would, we're hoping to have a attractive front porch and a little bit of space for some landscaping, just to make the house look nice and welcoming.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? Anybody? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Chairman Hovis, for a point of clarification on the legal address stated as the subject property, that is a vacant lot, correct? Yes.
Oh.
I believe that what he would like is the address at which you reside.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it had to be this
Thank you.
address. 108 Oak Street, Vienna, Virginia.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate the clarification. All right, we will move on to the evidentiary hearing and open up to anyone that would wish to present anything further that, as a reminder, that's competent material and substantial evidence related to this matter. Anyone? All right, just seeing that we have none at this time, we'll move over. Is there any additional information from the city? Okay. Any additional information from the applicant? All right, we'll close the evidentiary hearing and move on to deliberations of the board.
No, I went by, looked at the property, and it does really conform with the neighborhood. Properties, as you're facing it to the left, are up to the street, and the property directly behind it is the side of a building with no windows. And I think it does fit in with certainly the spirit and character of the neighborhood.
Yeah. Anybody, any other input or discussion?
I agree with Patrick.
Yeah, based on the way the alley does present a unique situation for them, they didn't put the alley there, so that definitely. All right, is any other discussion, or I'd entertain a motion either for, in favor, or not related to this?
Well, I think, based on the four findings of fact, there is an unnecessary hardship because of the easement from ABC Alley and the unique size of the lot and shape of the lot. And those conditions are peculiar to that property. And of course, it did not, and is this the one where two properties combined? Is that right? Yeah.
It was originally two lots, yes.
So I think the applicant has done everything to alleviate the hardship. And based on the surrounding properties, I think it's certainly consistent with the spirit and purpose because it does fit in with the character of the neighborhood.
To put that in the form of a motion?
I would like to propose a motion to approve the variance at 917 North Fifth Avenue based on the four findings of fact.
All right, we have a motion for approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes unanimously. We'll move on to item number 5. Number 5 is involves the address. I'm sorry. We just need to, I guess, get a motion to recuse.
Unless there's an objection to him recusing,
Okay.
he can just recuse himself.
Okay, perfect. That's even easier. All right, thank
And we
you.
do have an alternate that's present to fill in. And as a preliminary matter, this is the item in which one party or one unnamed party would like to make a motion to continue before you hear anything substantive about the case.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and listen.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I would recommend listening to the motion to continue and the, any evidence in opposition to that from the applicant or any other parties withstanding.
Okay, should we let, I guess, the person asking for a continuance come first and then the applicant
Yes, sir.
follow?
That's what I would recommend. Yes,
All
sir.
right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Grady Richardson. My office is at 1908 Eastwood Road in Wilmington, 28403. I represent several property owners that are adjacent to, adjoining, or in nearby proximity to the subject tract. That's in item number 5. Yesterday, I submitted a motion to continue this hearing on behalf of the named folks in the letter were Mr. and Mrs. Christine Hughes and Daniel Hughes, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Ruffner, Mr. and Mrs. William Gammons, Mr. and Mrs. David Sneeden, and Mr. and Mrs. Robert Keith. It's my understanding all of those folks are here. In addition to those folks that were identified in the motion, I represent another approximate 52 properties that are adjacent or own Hawthorne Road, which adjoins the subject tract, or they're right across the other side of Hawthorne Road, so they're adjacent to the subject tract. I've also received confirmation that I represent another almost 20 non-Hawthorne Road property owners in the vicinity. The reason for the requested continuance is kind of summarized in my motion. My folks and I received the applicant's materials 8 days ago. And then we received staff report from Ms. Huffman. I received that Friday afternoon, 6 days ago. As you all know, this is a quasi-judicial setting. The applicant carries the burden for the variance to proffer substantial material and competent evidence. We don't believe the applicant will meet that threshold, but if the board finds otherwise, my clients and I would need to present substantial material and competent evidence. That's oftentimes achieved by experts, engineers, appraisers, title attorneys, land use consultants, environmental engineers, and we just simply do not have enough time, traffic engineers, to secure those sorts of persons to oppose the application if it gets past the threshold of carrying the burden before this board for a variance. That's the reason for the requested continuance. I do have, as you can see, a number of folks here that live in the area that are my clients, and some of which may not be my clients, but they're here in opposition today if it goes forward, and we'll present the lay testimony. But I would submit to you, we have not had sufficient time to prepare for this under the prevailing legal standards, and due process requires a continuance. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I believe the applicant opposes it. I'm not sure of the reasons for that, but I'm sure he'll let you know.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Grady? No? All right, thank you, sir. We'll ask that the applicant.
Good afternoon, Dave Spitrino, 3902 Market Street. I am the applicant. I've got two very significant issues with Mr. Richardson's request. First, let me state, Mr. Richardson is by far an outstanding attorney. He is extremely good, and he is the very best person the neighbors could hire to do this work. What makes him so good is he's aggressive, and he is ready to go in and fight. And unfortunately, he is way off base here. He's in the wrong venue for the wrong approach. We are not here to debate traffic, rezoning, land ownership, title, noise. We are here specifically because I have a problem that no one else could assist me with, and I'm coming to the Board of Adjustments as it relates to trees and height. But there's another reason that I'm really against the approach to delay this, and I have gone above and beyond to be as transparent as possible when I found that I had an issue. I don't want to be here. I am only in front of the Board of Adjustments because I have no other options. My situation, I thought, would go through staff, not available. City attorney, no. City manager, Planning commission, not there. Can I take it to city council? No. The only group that can help you make a decision, and that's all I need direction in a conflict within the Land Development Code. Do I go this way or this way? Is the five of you. But what I have most kind of consternation when I read the continuance is that this is some kind of shock that I'm here. And I want to make it clear that I have provided above and beyond anything I am required to do. Every 6 weeks, I have mailed a letter to everyone within 300 feet. I have been collecting email addresses constantly to make sure that anything that is happening on this site is notified, communicated, and clearly accessible back to me if there's information needed. I want to make sure I put to you a couple of things. On January 30th, I notified by mail over 200 people, 4-page document in color. Hey, this is what's going on. This is what we're working on. And by the way, in detail, there will be a Board of Adjustments meeting in 7 weeks on March 16th in this room to discuss height and trees. Please be aware. And in that same letter, once again, I reiterated, please put this on your calendar. On March 16th, I'm going to be talking to people about something that could affect you. Please pay attention to that. I followed it up with another email, not by mail, only by email to 97 people on February 14th with a question and answer where I also reiterated, here's why I'm asking and for direction from the Board of Adjustments. So while in Mr. Richardson's continuance, he says, we've been given the extremely short period of time between notices of application sent to the property owners. The notices have been out there for a long time. Now, I will give it to Mr. Richardson. Is it his fault that he only has 8 days to read 6 sentences and look at 5 pictures? It's not his fault. But is it his problem that his clients waited until they saw a sign by staff under the rules show up in their neighborhood that we were going to be here today? His problem should not be my problem. He had the time to write a continuance. He could have read my 6 sentences under findings of fact and looked at 5 photos, 3 of which are identical with the exception of the key. So I am prepared to move forward. I am prepared to get an answer because I want to make it clear. My problem came up in November. November, December, January, I submitted my application. February, and here I am at March. And now you're asking me to go to potentially, not you, the claimant is asking me to go until now April or for some other unknown reason, May, because the traffic engineer was on spring break. I'm ready to present because the cost associated with delays are not insignificant, and I should not bear that burden because Mr. Richardson didn't have time in the last 8 days to read our application. Thank you for consideration.
All right, thank you. All right.
Just briefly, clearly I had time to read his application. He's clearly upset that I'm the one asking for a continuance. We have to go off of when the application is given notification by the city, not when Mr. Spatrino starts putting out feelers in the neighborhood, none of which I've received, so he's right. I'm the attorney now that's representing folks, and just because Mr. Spatrino says it so is not the legal standard. The legal standard is, does he present substantial material and competent evidence to even pass the threshold, and if he does, then my clients are entitled to put on their substantial material and competent evidence to rebut it. This is not a simple 6-page application and 6 sentences or whatever Mr. Spatrino would have you believe. In fact, I would submit to you, if it goes that far, that the variance is in itself illegal because he's not seeking a variance of any standard. He's seeking to increase the height to facilitate rezoning of uses, and you cannot, as a Board of Adjustment, grant a variance on uses. That is for the legislative process for rezoning. I would respectfully submit, has put the cart before the horse. He's trying to get the height increase under the guise of saving trees. Imagine the subjectivity and the slippery slope we run as a Board of Adjustment. So it's not as simple as Mr. Spatrino would have. We're not talking about just increasing it, although we are opposed to the height increase. It's beyond that. And if he gets to the point where this board, despite my motion that will come saying he has not satisfied his burden of carrying the variance, and you should dismiss it summarily, if you say otherwise, then I have to put on my evidence. I have not had the opportunity, as the lawyer representing the folks that are here before you today, to secure experts in the fields that I believe are necessary to oppose Mr. Spatrino's application. And the legal standard is not just lay testimony, it is substantial material and competent evidence that's generated by experts in the fields for purposes of this board's consideration.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Spatrino?
I am not here seeking rezoning. I have already stated that I will be rezoning this property. I may fail, I may succeed, but in order to do an effective job, I need direction from somebody who can give it to me. And frankly, your answer does not matter. It matters only that I either go this way with a project and bring the very best project forward that I can, or I go this way. But I know what is easy, and I know what is right. And unfortunately, they do not align in this situation. Your land development code and your city's comprehensive plan are in conflict with what I am trying to achieve on this project. So I am glad for Mr. Richardson to take upon him all sources of appeals should he feel that he's wronged in this process. That is his right. But to delay me further because I have a question that I need answered so I can proceed is unjust and unfair, and I'm asking this board to consider that. And the request that I have of being able to carry forward what I need. Again, Mr. Richardson is not left holding the bag if you vote one way or the other. The answer doesn't matter. I just need direction. He can appeal that answer should he need it.
All right, thank you, sir. I will defer to our attorney for just to outline sort of the process. Right now, just to, so everyone knows what we're here for is purely a variance.
Well, the first thing you need to decide is if you will grant the continuance request.
Yes. Okay. And does any board members have any questions regarding the situation? And
that will be a formal vote, Mr. Chair.
thank you. We'll have a discussion. Like I said, we have two situations. We know what our purview is, so.
I'm just trying to lay out the dates here to make sense of this. He's saying January, really it's January 30th, so one of the last days of the month. Then what are our other timelines because we see nothing in our evidence about when you supposedly sent letters. So I don't see any proof that you sent letters before.
I can submit the documentation if needed.
I
And
get-
I can absolutely get the receipts from the people that received the emails.
Yeah, I guess maybe.
We're not looking at those right now,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
I know January 30th. Any other key dates we should know that can help this decision?
Well, and also, I guess if they follow the procedure for a standard variance, the information, so part of it is that the city followed the posting requirements and the mail requirements.
Yes, all of that was done within the statutory requirements as well as the land development code requirements.
So really, we have information in front of us of what is set in the city land use code and set in the city standards is not, we don't set that. We go with that. So on that, we feel that's why I wanted confirmation that we met all those requirements.
Yes.
In our discussion. Okay.
All of those requirements have been met. I think what Mr. Richardson is arguing is that there is a due process issue based on the timing. So that's what you as the decision-making body will need to, make a decision on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And sorry, I did not mean to cut you off. I just wanted to try to make sure we've honed in on where we were on that. And
Is a clarification on this 8 days thing? Mr. Richardson, what are you talking about with the you just recently found out 8 days ago? Can you clarify that?
Yes, sir. So 8 days ago is when notifications were starting to get received by the neighborhood of Mr. Spatrino's application from the city. On that day, we reached out. I first sent an attorney from my office because the letter from the city, and I've got it if you need to see it, but I think Ms. Huffman can confirm this. The letter from the city says, this is coming up on March 16th at 1 p.m. And if you want to review the application materials, you can come down to the city offices between 8 and 5 Monday through Friday. So that day, I sent Attorney Russ Bryan downtown, and he was turned away because those materials were not available and ready for him. I then emailed Ms. Huffman, Meredith Everhart, and said, what gives? You've got a letter here saying that the materials are available for us to review, and we don't have them. And Ms. Huffman, I believe it was Ms. Huffman, sent me an email attaching by link application materials of Mr. Spatrino. Then I asked for the staff report and the staff summary and was told that that was not ready yet, that as soon as it would be ready, Thursday or Friday, she would send it to me. Ms. Huffman sent it to me Friday afternoon. That was the 6th day. So between last week, 8 days, and 6 days are the two things I'm talking about. And one thing I failed to mention or specify is I'm asking for a continuance until the April meeting of this Board of Adjustment. Does that answer your question, sir?
Thank you.
All right, while we have you up here, let me ask if anyone else have any questions? Mr. Grady? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll continue discussion on the thoughts of a continuance versus moving forward.
And there's obviously a substantial number of people here that are concerned and ensuring that. So we know the signage went out at the correct date, correct, Ms. Huffman?
Yes, the signage was done at the correct
Can
date.
you verify that, like, when he went down there, that the paperwork wasn't, the summaries were not ready for him yet?
Yes, so we provided the application, which, as Mr. Richardson indicated, because that was prepared, one of the statutory requirements of providing you all the staff reports early, before your meeting, instead of you showing up and us handing them to you then, is that we also simultaneously supply those to the applicant, and in this case, we had notification from Mr. Richardson that he would also like that information since he was representing folks that he felt had standing. So all of those were distributed in accordance with not only statute, but the city's regular procedures.
Anybody have any other questions of?
I mean, I tend to agree to go ahead and hear the request because there are appeal processes where you would have more time, and then that way we can go ahead and give Mr. Spatrino some direction of where he needs to go in the meantime, because he is just looking for an answer right now.
Yeah,
Anyone else?
I agree. If the signage went out on time, I'm looking at the date timestamp of the email that the board was provided. It's very clear. If all the statutory requirements were held up, I don't see how we can go otherwise.
And just for clarification, for determination, does it have to be a simple majority or a 4/5?
Simple majority.
All right, thank you. All right, is there anyone that would like to make a motion on how we proceed?
I'll make a motion that we proceed.
There's been a motion that we proceed. Is there a second? I'll second.
Second.
All right, I'll go for your second. All those in favor, say aye and raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We will move forward with the case. We will move forward with the case involving 1320 Independence Boulevard, the variance to a maximum building height requirements in the R15 residential district pursuant to City Code, Chapter 18, Land Development Code, Section 18-28 and 18-36. We'll start with moving forward with the preliminary statement. Thank you.
Good afternoon again. Subject property consists of 2 vacant parcels that the applicant proposes to develop with 3-story townhomes. Land Development Code Section 18-28 allows a maximum building height of 35 feet in all residential districts. Per Section 18662 of the Land Development Code, building height shall be measured as the vertical distance between the average undisturbed grade at the foundation of the building to the highest finished roof surface, in the case of a flat roof, or in the case of a pitched roof, to a point halfway between the highest peak and the highest eave. The proposed townhomes have been designed to maximize tree save without significantly reducing the allowable density. To minimize the removal of mature regulated trees, the applicant has proposed a smaller footprint but taller structure. The applicant states that this specific infill site contains approximately 2,600 regulated trees estimated by a third-party professional. Per Attachment 3, provided by the applicant, by right development would result in removal of approximately 1,408 trees. By reducing the footprint, the applicant could preserve 903 of those trees. On January 31st, 2023, planning staff accepted an application for a 5-foot variance to Land Development Code Section 18-28 to allow proposed structures to be 40 feet in height in a residential district. The applicant states that the variance would allow height to offset the building footprint, which in turn reduces the amount of disturbed area and subsequent loss of trees. This matter is set for hearing today, March 16th, 2023. This case is subject to the 4 findings of fact, which I have placed on the screen for you. I ask that this presentation and all materials be submitted to the record. I'm available for any questions, and the applicant is obviously here as well.
All right. Does anyone have any questions at this point? All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to the applicant's presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to proceed.
And since, I'm sorry, just since
Yes, of course.
Go ahead and just state your name and
David
and legal
Spetrino,
address.
applicant, 3902 Market Street. My first office when I moved to Wilmington,
It has to be your residential address or your business address.
3902 Market Street, Wilmington, North Carolina, 28403.
Thank you. We're good.
Thank you. So my first office in Wilmington was at the Cotton Exchange. I rented from a gentleman named John Bullock, his daughter, Nancy, and I lived at the foot of Dock Street, right where it turns to Wrightsville Avenue, kind of between Church and Ann on Wrightsville. On my way to work, I would take either Chestnut or Red Cross or even Market Street, but on the way home, I would take Walnut to Fifth, Fifth to Dock. It was a nice, interesting street to take, and it had lots of trees and things that you never really noticed until you're chilling out at the end of a day. Well, one afternoon I saw something different. I saw sawdust all over Fifth Street as I was at the light at Fifth and Princess. Dan Mond's office on the right, Murkison Taylor Gibson on the left. I saw a tree that had been completely shaped around power lines. And I remember thinking to myself, Wilmington seems to value power over trees. Well, of course they do. Power is way more important than trees, but too bad there's not a way to handle that. But it was a moment when I kind of had my own kind of, a before and after, when I realized that as a community, our trees are valuable, they don't last forever, and a few things we could be doing to start saving or preserving those trees. That was over 30 years ago. Fast forward, and I have found myself in a number of situations, an edgy but symbiotic relationship with Aaron Reese. I have planted numerous trees all over the north side of Wilmington. Elms do well, Zelkovas not so much for me. I even presented to the Wilmington Tree Commission about 15 years ago a white paper entitled ABP, Always Be Planting, Ways Our Community Can Look at Additional Trees. Fast forward to pretty much, if you can believe it, 7 years this month when the city came out with the Wilmington Comprehensive Plan, a document that I had no involvement in creating, but I am very proud as it's tied to our city. When we look at that document specifically, Chapter 6, and I'll reference page 102, we go on and on in our document that we should be preserving trees, canopy, reforestation, management, and bottom line, we should be planting more trees and protecting the ones we have. Now, a year ago, we got a new land development code, and that land development code has by far some of the most aggressive tree save I have ever seen in anyone's code. I don't know necessarily what the long-term impacts of that code will be, but I'm trying to be a rule follower, and I went through that code and recognized that the city is taking regulated trees seriously, so much so that they have put very stringent demands on anyone, whether it's infill, whether it's greenfield development, doesn't matter, those trees are a priority. And I recognize that, and I respect that. More recently, though, something happened that helped me understand better how important these trees were. We have a project, 6 single-family homes. We were trying to preserve not some of the trees, not most of the trees, we tried to preserve all of the trees. We had oaks, we had magnolias, we had a live oak, we had young, we had old. We went to the expense, not required, to tree survey that R5 site and identify exactly where those trees needed to be. Then we took it upon ourselves to change our floor plans. We made the homes more narrow. We moved the porches. We shifted it at a little bit of an angle, and we staked those home sites out in the field so we could bring our tree consultant, Dr. Jim Gregory, and our arborist, Joshua Shields, into the project to look at those trees and to make sure we would do no harm. Unfortunately, 3 of those trees were not where the surveyor said they would be. They weren't off by much, just a couple feet. But that couple of feet meant that all that work that we had done, all that effort to try to save those trees, all of those trees, all of that effort was going to be for naught because I had done everything I could physically with the house, but I no longer had the ability to move the house over because I had a 7-foot wide setback, 7 feet. Well, my tree consultant said, hey, it's okay, it's our zoning, you can take the trees down, it's not a big deal, don't take it so hard. You should be applauded for your effort. And that may be accurate, and that is true, but I wasn't happy with that result. I had a sunk cost. I had worked, again, it's a sunk cost, but I had worked to try to figure out how to solve the problem. I called staff and I said, this is a real bummer. This is what I'm trying to do. And staff said, well, if you're saving a tree and you can prove that you're saving that tree and you can prove that that tree will be okay, we can give you a variance to a side setback. Really? Well, that's a great solution. So trees are more important than side setbacks. Well, Dave, don't go crazy. What are you thinking? Well, I'm a 7-foot side setback. If I can get to a 4-foot side setback, I think I can make this work. And I provided the documentation, I did the effort, I showed everything on a plan, and I brought to staff something where I believe that if they could provide me with that variance, I not only could, I did save those trees, and those trees are flourishing. That got me thinking about our current situation. Back to the regulated trees. My consultant did 5 acres of ribboned trees. We have 687 documented regulated trees in a 5-acre tract of what is approximately a 20-acre tract. So we went back to work with how can we solve this problem? If trees are so important to our community, what can we be doing to solve that problem? The first thing we did, found smaller footprints. Still got to sell it, people still got to live in it, but how narrow can I make that footprint work? How can I also get shorter setbacks? How can I reduce the amount of built-upon area? Instead of every home having a driveway, what if 4 homes shared a courtyard? That's 1 driveway for 4 homes. That will save the number of trees that we want to save. What if we move those homes as close as possible to the private streets? Move them so that these aren't going further and further into the property, but instead closely knit, so we keep our footprints compact in an effort to save trees. Now, typically, I would not recommend any variance in an R zoning for one party, only to sell that to a third party. You can't do it. If you remember from either your philosophy class or even your econ class, there's the tragedy of the commons. That's where a property owner oftentimes will act in his own best interest. In the 1800s, this came about because one guy's cow was always eating the village greens, everybody's property, eating all their grass. So how do you manage that in a situation like this? Well, you shouldn't just give me the variance and say, hey, it's fine. There's got to be some handcuffs to that. Those handcuffs have worked very well for me in other similar projects. The handcuffs involve what is called limited common area or limited common elements. The trees in these R zonings aren't owned by the property owner anymore. Those trees or buffers or wherever they may be, they stay with the neighborhood, which means it's now a bylaw, a declaration, a requirement, or even an easement that can no longer be disturbed. That means that unlike a traditional R, where I sell a house, somebody builds it and they go, I don't like trees, and they take it all out, I get to put in control or into place for my adjacent neighbors and my adjacent property owners a massive buffer of trees that can be undisturbed in perpetuity. So a couple questions as I wrap up. First, my first question is a 50% decrease in a side setback in order to preserve trees acceptable? Would a 10 or a 15% increase in height also be acceptable? That's the question I'm here to try and get you to answer for me. But the second thing, and I really want to put that out there, is selfishly, and if this is not fair, and I apologize in advance, selfishly, I know that trees are more important than side setbacks. I also know that trees are less important than power lines. I know that because when I drove by Marcus and Taylor Gibson and Dan Mon's office, the tree that I bemoaned 30 years ago has long been gone. And instead of another tree, it's a brand new telephone pole. So I know where trees are in the pecking order when it comes to side setbacks and things like electricity. What I'm not clear on is, do I do one type of product that disregards in an R zoning the value of trees, or do I do another product that could in fact be a model that could start to solve the importance that the comprehensive plan puts with regard to tree preservation. Thank you very much.
Mr. Petrino, I just wanted to give the board or the commission members any, did they have any questions right now?
My apologies.
No. Anybody? I have one. So your variance you're seeking today is solely around the 5-foot variance for height.
Well, the townhomes that we're proposing are 3 stories. However, if I do a 3-story flat roof, the things that would normally be in an attic, things like storage or heating and air or any kind of usual uses for the roof, because of our height limit, the way our height limit reads, if that roof can't be built, all the things that go in there have to go somewhere else. So the homes aren't necessarily any, it's not that their discussion is, well, we don't want 3-story townhomes. Well, that's what we're going to do if there's a rezoning. That's the appropriate thing to do on a site like that. But if the 3-story product needs to be a flat roof, well, we're going this way. And if the 3-story product can be a pitched roof, we can go this way. But to get a pitched roof to work, the way the height limit reads, highest eave to highest point, I am off between 2 and 5 feet for the product type that is most logical within that location. Still going to get 3-story townhomes. That's not changing. And for the people in the audience that want patio homes, I'm not going to be proposing patio homes. I'm going to be proposing a narrow, small, low-impact, tall, 3-story tall product, but that product is either a pitched roof or a flat roof, because the flat roof, not a problem. But for I run out of real estate inside that home for HVAC closets or storage or all the other reasons you'd have in an attic.
Just wanted to make it clear what we were able to do and what your variance is related to because there's been a lot of talk about the trees, but you're purely right now it's a 5-foot variance, nothing on setbacks or anything like that. It's purely the height.
The variance should, and I'm speaking against my own argument, the variance must include some handcuffs to protect the trees. You do not want to set a precedent where you give a guy a couple of feet and he does what he wants you to do, but then the guy that comes behind him says, to hell with the trees. I am looking for a mechanism where if we give him this, he gives us that. And that is something that our community needs, and it will encourage other people. Again, we're talking not about a 5-story or 6-story or even a 4-story building. We're talking about the ability to, my floor systems in my current building are this tall. In the old days, they used to be this tall. More things are happening between floors. What I could build at 35 feet, it is no longer as easily acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Anyone? Yes.
Is this on? Can you show us the overhead with the zoning districts on it? In driving back through there the other day, I was looking at, I guess, the MFH. What is the height of the buildings in that area? Do you have any idea?
I was intending to downzone that location, but I believe MD10 is 40. I would defer to staff to confirm what MFH is, since that's a legacy district. And I would also be curious what the RB zoning is. I wasn't trying to make a precedent. I was trying to focus inward on our project, not on what the neighbors are doing.
We can get clarification for those height.
Yeah, and so the first question was on height, since we're talking about height and
Right.
trees. And then the second one, I guess it's R15 currently. What would it look like from a tree removal standpoint if it were developed as an R15 subdivision?
If it was developed as an R15 subdivision, we would be selling home sites, and the property owner could determine if they wanted to retain any trees, and if so, what trees those would be. If we're developing the project, we're going to be handcuffed to providing buffers and protecting as much tree canopy as possible. A subdivided R15 home site, there are no tree protections, and there is no obligation on my part to try to enforce tree protections. I can encourage it, but it's hard for me. It's hard for someone to tell someone else what they can and can't do on their private property.
thank you. Anyone else have any other questions for the applicant?
Mr. Monroe, you look pensive and thoughtful.
No, we're good. All right, thank you. I'm sure there'll be other ones. Thank you.
In response to the question about the maximum height in the MD districts, that's 96 feet. That's 96 feet is the maximum height.
And that's in the MF, I'm sorry.
The multiple dwelling.
Okay, thank you. And then RB is capped at,
Also 96 feet.
okay. All right, okay, is there anything else? Applicant's good. We'll move on to additional evidence from Mr. Grady.
Well, that's what I was getting ready to ask, is process-wise, the applicant is just given his pitch. My understanding is I get to cross-examine the applicant.
That's correct. If there is a party or person who has standing, they have the ability to participate fully in the hearing. So they'll have the option to review all of the evidence, cross-examine witnesses, and make a presentation on their own prior to opening the general evidentiary hearing.
Right, okay.
So I'm able to ask Mr. Spatrino
Yes, sir.
questions at this point, all right? And what is the best way from an audio perspective? Is there a portable microphone?
You hold on one second, I think we've got a solution.
Don't stab me, Mr. Spatrino.
Of course not, I'm a big fan. You look good in that tie today.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so the question is, other than the MFH legacy portion of the subject tracts, the rest of it is zoned R15, correct?
That is correct.
Why specifically do you want to increase the maximum height in the R15 district from 35 feet to 40 feet?
I am comfortable with either decision of the board. The product and type is the same. However, based on the information we received from our tree survey, if I am doing a more narrow home that is slightly taller by approximately 10%, I can save a significant number of trees.
So why are you wanting to raise the height by way of a variance from 35 feet to 40 feet in the R15 district?
The 35-foot height limit is not is something I can adjust through the Planning Commission or City Council process. So the only way to increase the height limit from 35 feet to 40 feet in order to preserve every available tree is through this process.
Just to be clear, earlier when you were giving your pitch on your application, you said the townhouses that you're proposing are 3 stories, but you cannot do townhomes in the R15 district, can you?
No, I cannot. I can build single-family homes and garage apartments.
Those things are permitted in the R15 district, correct?
Currently, that is correct.
So what you're hoping to do is to build townhomes on R15. The only way in which you can do that is to get a rezoning after this hearing today at some point, right?
Correct. If there is no rezoning, there is no other townhome product. However, and I will state, because of the requirements that I provide a conditional use rezoning versus a general district rezoning, I have to provide elevations and not necessarily floor plans, but elevations in a site plan showing the product that I'm presenting. So from this board, again, the answer does not matter to me, but if I'm going to be presenting to a 35-foot height limit, I will have a flat roof. If I'm presenting to a 38 or a 40-foot height limit, I will present a pitched or an architecturally more noticeable roof.
Just to be clear, there is nothing in the R15 district for this property that prevents you from building single-family homes up to a maximum height of 35 feet, correct?
That is correct.
There's nothing, if you were to get it rezoned, which we're going to oppose, but if you were to get it rezoned, you can still build the desired townhomes you seek with a 35-foot height variance. It's just not your preference.
Again, I can make either work. However, if I am limited to a flat roof, those components that are required to function a house would require a wider footprint, which will affect the amount of tree save that I can achieve.
Ms. Garman, if you will, if you can project the application. My materials show it as page 10 of the board's application materials.
That's right. We don't have that as part of the presentation, but if you could turn to page 10 for Mr. Richardson.
And if the board is there, what I have is Mr. Spatrino's reasons for his variance request. Does everyone have that in front of them? So this is his application, and what you've heard is Mr. Spatrino is saying, I want to increase the height from 35 feet to 40 feet so that I can build townhomes that I'm not permitted to build right now, that I hope to get a rezoning, all for purposes of saving trees. Now, Mr. Spatrino, there's nothing in the city's code of ordinances anywhere that says if there's a protected tree and you have to cut it down, you cannot do so, right? You have to go through mitigation measures, correct?
I'm sorry, state your question again.
With the tree preservation ordinance, there's nothing in there that says if you can't preserve trees, that constitutes a hardship, right?
The mandate and the intent of the code is to preserve trees. However, if a tree has to be removed, that tree must be mitigated.
Right. If the tree has to be removed, you have to mitigate that loss of the tree.
I don't have to do that in our zoning.
Okay. So you can build single-family homes like everything around it on this subject tract, R15. You can build single-family homes like already exist and have existed for decades, correct?
Yes, and I can remove every single tree on the site.
Right, and then that gets into marketing and whether you can sell houses that don't have any trees. That's up to you. But at the end of the day, there's nothing in the tree preservation ordinance that says you cannot build R15 homes on this subject tract, correct?
Correct.
There's nothing in the tree preservation ordinance that says if you were to get a rezoning, that you can't get the rezoning because you're going to take down so many trees because of townhomes, correct?
I'm not here because I'm concerned about a hardship about not being able to build townhomes. I'm here because I can't understand from our land development code which are more important, height or trees. That is the challenge to this board. That's all I need to know. Because the tree ordinance is very difficult, but if trees aren't that important, then tell me now. If trees are important, then tell me now.
So going back to the application in front of you, members of the board, under paragraph 3A, the applicant himself is telling you he does not have a hardship for purposes of today's hearing. He does not have a hardship, and he must have a hardship, and he must carry his burden of showing a hardship to get a variance. He says, we do not see the substantial number of trees as a hardship.
But we do see the ability to responsibly retain as many trees as possible to be hindered by an existing longstanding height limit that does not take into account the constraints associated with modern construction and consumer expectations.
We know that Mr. Spatrino wants to save trees, so he says, we take him at his word. He wants to save trees because he says he needs an extra 5 feet to go up vertically to save so many trees. That's not a hardship. Now, if he wants to come in for a rezoning, whenever that is, and make his pitch for a rezoning, and as part of his rezoning say that he wants it to be conditioned upon getting a height maximum increase, then he can do so then. But right now, that's inappropriate for this board, and what he's in effect asking you to do is to pass the cart before the horse, because he's asking you to legislate, which you cannot do, a zoning use change, because he wants to get this height increase to accomplish what he believes is going to be a rezoning that he's going to seek because of aesthetically designed buildings with pitched roofs. Correct, Mr. Spatrino?
It was my understanding that council could not rule on height in my application. If that's incorrect, please let me know. I would much rather be at council than at the Board of Adjustments.
Board of Adjustment, for all of you, you look at the application, And what you've heard today is a noble cause. He says he wants to go up an additional 5 feet for aesthetic designs of townhomes that he cannot build in this district right now. And he says he can build the townhomes that he wishes to build, but they won't look the same because he has to stay with a 35-foot height. But he can't get those because he doesn't have the zoning for it right now. That is not a hardship. That's a legislative request that he's asking to do. And that does not pass the pale. And I would ask, before we start parading dozens of people up here, they're going to tell you the problems with the density that would come with what he really is asking to do, is to lay the foundation for rezoning, is to dismiss this application summarily. And I'm happy to get into the law that governs. And you can ask Ms. Huffman. She will tell you that when you look at the standards for granting a variance, if I may have a moment. The case law, Ms. Huffman, Sherrill versus Wrightsville Beach, 1985 case. 2 lots were zoned R1, and the plaintiffs wanted to, and that was for single-family residential. The plaintiffs wished to build duplexes, 2 homes essentially on each lot. They tried to do it by rezoning, it was denied. They then went before the Board of Aldermen for a variance request, and it was denied. And the law in Sherrill says very clearly that a use that conflicts with the general purpose or spirit of the zoning ordinance can only be authorized by the Board of Aldermen acting in their legislative capacity to rezone. You're not that body, that's the City Council. It goes on to say that building the construction of a duplex would violate the spirit as well as the letter of the R1 zoning classification, and so they denied the plaintiff's request there. But now as you go to the law on variances, I apologize here. Got too much stuff. Give me a second. Per the Board of Adjustment's own, we'll just say, Code 18-26, where it lays out your powers. It says that variances are such that they will not be contrary to the public interest, to the spirit of the chapter, and where owing to special conditions, a literal enforcement of the provisions of this chapter would result in unnecessary physical but not economic hardship. As you look at the hardship, we have Coates Canons from the School of Government. I'm sure Ms. Huffman's familiar with that. It's by Adam Lovelady. In order to obtain a variance, the applicant must show all of the following. Unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the ordinance. Don't have that here. He can build R15. He's told you he can. He just wants to preserve trees, which is not a sufficient reason for a variance. He says he wants to do it because it's going to help him with his rezoning. That is premature and is not appropriately before the board.
I'm just, 1 second, please, because we were doing it, he was to cross-examine witness. Does this still fall within that category? I'm just asking for your clarification, or do we do it in the public? Which do you?
What are you asking to do?
Definitely, you're sort of going into your positioning and your basis of it versus questioning the witness. And I'm just being a non-legal person. I'm pulling that in just to make sure we're following procedure on that.
I think, and Mr. Richardson, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I think at this point you're asking the board to perhaps make a decision on,
I'm asking for the board to summarily dismiss this application per Mr. Spatrino's own testimony, both on direct and cross. He has not testified as to anything, not a scintilla of anything to give rise to being granted or being able to proceed forward in this hearing today for purposes of a variance based upon an actual hardship.
no, Okay, yes, sir. I'm not aware of a procedural mechanism for the board to make that decision at this time. I think that would be more appropriate at the end after hearing all of the evidence and deliberations.
Yeah, that's just where I was going with it, because I know we have to go into the evidentiary hearing, but like I said, it's sort of a unique situation, so we're going at that. But I wanted to see if there was more questions for Mr. Petrino, or if we go into where then you have the time to do the rest of it in evidentiary.
I don't have any further questions at this time of Mr. Spatrino.
Okay, all right. Anything else? You're good on that? And Mr. Petrino, anything further in this part?
I seek an answer in any way that I can. I am not the attorney. I just build houses for a living, but I have gone through all the process, and my only result of getting clarification, because again, I don't want to be here. I mean, I've done a good job of staying on a Board of Adjustments since 2005. I just need direction from this board as to how you would like me to address this or any project when it comes to the new land development code and the guardrails put within there as it relates to trees.
All right, and like moving forward in the process, we would go through, we're going to move forward with the evidentiary hearing, and I understand there's a lot of people here that have an opinion. I think we need to stress what is done during the evidentiary hearing is actually presenting of evidence. It is not necessarily opinion, and I'll err to our attorney's advice on that, but I do want to make it, we do want people to have the ability of putting like as we said before, material, substantive evidence forward. And Mr. Grady, that's where, then we open this hearing, I'm sure you'll start that off.
Sorry, I was conferring with someone. At this point, the public hearing's open for opponents only of the project, or does Mr. Spatrino still go and put on his evidence right now?
I believe Mr. Spatrino has already made his presentation. As a representative of folks with standing, you would have the ability to make a presentation if you are prepared to do so. And then when the evidentiary hearing is open, it's not limited to those in opposition or in support of the project. It's open to anyone with substantial competent evidence.
So we'll start offering up witnesses, but I do have some questions for Mr. Spatrino based on what he just said.
Yes, sir. And I think that would be appropriate to allow that additional cross.
It is fine.
Mr. Spatrino, what is the clarification you seek from this board exactly?
There are conflicting information both in the comprehensive plan and the land development code. The recent land development code clearly goes into great detail the importance of trees, every tree, regulated trees, and the mandate to the developer or any person that does what I do for a living to protect and preserve and reforest and mitigate those trees. I am unclear if it is okay for me to adjust the placement of a home where it may encroach into a side setback in order to save a tree. Is it also okay for me to expand the height or the peak of a roof in the same manner to protect trees as well?
So where's the conflict in the code? There's a tree preservation ordinance, a desire to save trees. Where's the conflict with that, with the code of R15?
The conflict is that if a variance can be mandated by staff for a side setback, and that is a horizontal variance, then why wouldn't the same apply to a vertical variance?
Well, hold on. You're referencing something that hasn't been put into evidence by any documentary evidence whatsoever. It's just you talking about some supposed side variance. I'm asking you.
I was under oath.
I'm asking you, what is the conflict between the tree preservation ordinance and the R15 zoning ordinance for this subject property?
As the developer, I will be required to mitigate, manage, or protect as many trees as possible, whether it's R15 or R7 or R5 or even MD10. Part of that ability to save and preserve and protect as many trees as possible is to use whatever resources are available to me to help save those trees.
Where is the conflict? There is no conflict, is there?
I don't understand. Of course,
There-
there's a conflict. There's a mandate in the comprehensive plan and the land development code that says I should be saving trees. So if I'm doing something knowing that I'm not saving trees, thereby is the conflict. And if the conflict isn't important to this board, just tell me. But my understanding is
What is the conflict between the preference for saving trees with anywhere else in the city code of ordinances for your subject property that's presently zoned R15? Where's the conflict? It's a preference. Where's the conflict?
again, I'm not an attorney. I don't understand how a duty or obligation or a mandate in our land development code can't be conflicted when put together.
Do you have section 18-316 of Article 5 of the city code that you cited in your application?
I do not.
We can get a copy for you. Is the, want to base the question, and we'll get the copy of the ordinance over to him.
I'm familiar with this part of the code.
Okay. Are you at where it says section 18-316 tree preservation?
I am.
Okay, and that section goes for subsection A, general, subsection B, protected trees, subsection C, retention standards for protected trees, and subsection D, tree protection during construction. Is that correct?
I see that.
And then it says E for negligence and F for mitigation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Anything in section 18-316 that you have in front of you that prohibits development for R15 on the subject property?
The subject property absolutely can be developed, but any tree that I harm must be mitigated. So therefore, that tree must be important, and mitigation is still not the replacement of an existing, mature, healthy tree. Why would I want to destroy trees when I don't need to, when an available setback or variance to something horizontal or vertical has been made available without harm to anyone around it?
So again, the tree preservation provisions are the preference of the city to preserve trees, correct?
It is my belief that the city would like to see as many trees as possible saved. At least that seems to be the mandate in their new land development code.
Again, my question is, the preference is for the trees to be preserved, correct?
I would imagine that preserving trees is better than cutting them down. Yes, that is correct.
But the section also acknowledges the fact, whether it's R15 or some other district, that there's going to be a loss of protected trees, correct?
We will not be able to save every tree on the site, no.
So the answer is yes, you're correct. There is provisions in here that anticipates the loss of protected trees, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that goes into the mitigation and what you've got to do to replace the tree, the protected tree that's been lost, correct?
Which is not free. Saving a tree costs me nothing. Removing a tree and then mitigating that tree is not only a loss to the tree that was there, it is now an expense that burdens myself and my future consumer.
Well, that expense is in this provision of the code, and it was in this provision of the code when you went under contract for the subject property, correct?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
This provision on tree preservation and mitigation was in the code when you went under contract for the property, correct?
No, it was not. The contract was prior to the new land development code.
Did you back out of the contract because of the new land development code?
No, I actually like the trees. That
So
was
you're
something that attracted me to the site. I look forward to preserving not just the 687 trees in the first 5 acres, but its 1,500 brothers and sisters among the rest of the land. I will not be able to save all, but again, if the city and the people in this room that are reviewing this believe that the trees are important enough that some moderate variance, which in return includes protection of those trees in perpetuity, is worthy, I'd love to pursue that.
There's nothing in your application about the cost for complying with the land development code, is there?
I don't believe so.
Okay. There's nothing in your application that says that you terminated the contract when the land development code came along, and then there was another contract built in the cost for mitigation of tree loss, correct?
Correct. I proceeded with this project because even the 35-foot height limit can be accommodated. I can build a great project. It can be successful, but it does mean that I have to lose legally and allowably, I can lose trees. And I just need to make sure that the 5 people who are reviewing this case are cool with that. I'm not cool with it, but it's not up to me.
I don't have any other questions of Mr. Spatrino at this time. Give me a second, I'll have some witnesses.
All right, thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, as Mr. Richardson's gathering his witnesses, I just wanted to clarify for the board, your decision is not going to be whether the city as a whole finds trees to be important or not. That is not what you're tasked to do today. You cannot make that decision. You are only going to be making a decision on those 4 findings of fact that are located in our statute and whether the applicant has met them.
Yes, ma'am.
So just,
For only the 5-foot height variance, that's it. That's the limitation of what
exactly.
we're looking
Yes,
at
sir.
today.
You're not making a moral decision about trees.
Right, we're limited to a request for a 5-foot height variance in our 15 district.
And yes, sir, and whether those findings of fact have been met, all 4 of them.
Yep, thank you. Well, if there's no more cross-examination, then I'm going to go ahead and move forward to the opening of the, do you want?
As a representative of folks with standing, I believe that Mr. Richardson can participate as any other party with standing would do, such as the city and
Right.
the applicant. So it's a little different than the full-on evidentiary
Right.
hearing where anyone from the public may add evidence. He has an opportunity to sort of present his case, if
Okay.
you will.
All right, well,
And in an effort to try and maybe streamline this, given where we're at, I'm wondering if a brief recess for me to confer with my folks might help things move it along and we don't have cumulative evidence going before you.
Please. Keyword evidence.
yeah, we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute recess. We'll be back at 2:42. Thank you. All right, we'll reopen the Board of Adjustments meeting. It's 2:46. Apologize for the 4 minutes late. Well, so to move forward, before I want to recognize the city attorney on
Yes,
this.
sir. So just so the audience is aware as well, I've been made aware that one of our board members, Mr. Tyler Newman, who's actually sitting in Mr. Graham Mitchell's spot because Mr. Mitchell had to recuse himself from this item, is on base. Is that correct, sir?
It's the organization that I work for, yes.
Okay. And that has a board in which Mr. Dave Spatrino is involved with that board in some manner?
Yeah, it's a development industry business advocacy organization, and as a member of our business community, he's on the board.
Okay.
But I think the other piece of that is I live in the neighborhood.
Oh, you also live in this neighborhood?
I do.
Okay. So knowing those 2 things, knowing that you will possibly be affected by this development, and also that you are on a board with Mr. Spatrino, do you feel like you could be impartial and unbiased toward both parties in this situation?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, if there's an additional objection to Mr. Newman continuing on with the case, the next procedure would be to take a vote of the entire board, but I'm not sure that there's going to be an additional objection from any of the parties. We'll have to wait and see.
Okay, I guess since we can ask them. Mr. Grady?
So I know Mr. Newman well and Mr. Spatrino. And in my opinion, I think the appearance of an impropriety is something to be avoided here. I'm not doubting Mr. Newman, but to me, I've got Mr. Newman who may live in the neighborhood, but he's also on a board that advocates for builders and development. And so I don't think that that's really appropriate, and I would ask that he step down. And I hate being like the bad guy.
And I will just point out that City Council knew Mr. Newman was on a board advocating for development. So what you would be considering is not his position on that board, because again, City Council was aware of that and appointed him to the Board of Adjustment. You would be considering whether, knowing these factors, that he lives in the neighborhood, and also that he's on a board with Mr. Spatrino, if you as a board as a whole believe that he can still be unbiased and give everyone the opportunity to be heard and proceed fairly.
Yeah, and we all like work and live in the community. I've served on other boards with people, and I also sell real estate and would sell things in that thing, and I can still be unbiased. And I think Tyler should be given the same credit for his ability to be unbiased, because we do this as a total volunteer effort. So, but it is something that we'll do as a vote as a board.
Yes, sir.
Based on what was raised by Mr. Grady, to move forward, does anyone feel there is a conflict and Tyler should step down, or do we move forward? And I'll ask for a vote.
A vote for Tyler to stay on the board and move forward.
Thank you, that would be great. And the second for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Is there anyone opposed?
Opposed.
All right, we have, it's well noted, and we appreciate it, and thank you, Tyler.
Just Chairman, I oppose, just to be clear.
Oh, you do oppose?
I do.
All right,
Thank you.
okay, thank you. All right, we'll continue forward. We are going to, when we left, you have the time now to present your case as related to this matter.
Well, before I present, I would renew my motion that the applicant hasn't met their burden for a variance on his prima facie case. It's his burden, and he's not satisfied. It should be dismissed. And then logistically, would you like the witnesses that I call here to testify here, or to sit where Mr. Spatrino is while I question them? How would you like me to do that? I can sit where he's at as well.
I guess to stay consistent, we'll keep the person making the questions to witnesses, stand at the podium, and we'll have the witnesses sit at the desk on there.
Okay.
Yeah, just to keep it consistent with that. All right?
And Mr. Chairman, do keep in mind, and Mr. Petrino, that you will have the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses in the same way that Mr. Richardson did earlier.
I would first call Robert Keith. And I believe, Mr. Keith, like every witness, the board and staff are going to ask to make sure that you've been sworn in before the hearing and before you give testimony. So go to that microphone and let us know if you were sworn in.
Yes, I was.
Is that working?
Is it on?
All right, Mr. Keith, state your full name and your address, please.
My name is Robert Keith. I live at 1633 Country Club Road.
How long have you lived there, sir?
About 15 years.
Approximately how far away are you from the subject tract that's the subject of today's variance request?
3 blocks, as the crow flies, probably 3/4 of a mile.
And are you retired, sir?
Mostly.
Okay. Can you describe for me what sort of daily activities you do outside of your home?
We like to walk in the neighborhood a lot. We have a dog. We like to take our dog to walk. We ride bikes a lot, my wife and I, in the neighborhood. So we spend a lot of time outside.
What's your observations regarding the current state of traffic around your home and the subject property?
I will have to just yes, and just 1 second, please. Because we're going in, you're having someone that is calling a witness. That's an expert in providing information. I just wanted to set the parameters, because we have quite a few of these.
Are you asking about traffic impact analysis?
Yeah, that's where I guess if you're asking questions of someone to give an expert advice on traffic, can you qualify him as an expert, sir?
I don't believe I have to. I'm asking him what his observations are of the traffic on a daily basis on the present time. That doesn't require any expert testimony.
I'm unclear how that affects trees and
Well, I'm unclear why there's even a variance request for that, but that's where we find ourselves today. So I'm putting on the best case I can to defend against the height variance request based on saving trees. Which is, he's already told you what he's wanting to do is to increase the density on the subject property which was raising the height, increasing vehicles, increasing people that are living in the subject property to the extent it can even be built if it doesn't have restrictive covenants that say it cannot be built. I'll also point out that the applicant is PBW Development LLC, a company. Mr. Spitrino is not an attorney. He cannot represent the company before you today, and for that additional reason, the application should be dismissed, because under North Carolina law, a company has to be represented by an attorney.
And in court, that would be correct, but in a quasi-judicial hearing, I don't believe that will hold.
Okay, I disagree, but that's what we have.
And that will be noted, and I'm just moving forward with the witness you have, that's why I was just asking if he was an expert in traffic.
I'm not calling him as an expert.
Okay.
I'm calling him as a lay witness, given his observations that are there, and given the variance that's before this board about saving trees, supposedly by Mr. Spitrino. He's already told you what the real purpose of it is.
All right, we'll continue.
Mr. Keith, what are your observations on a daily basis concerning the traffic around your home and the subject property?
Different parts of the neighborhood between Oleander and Country Club where I live and over through some of the adjoining streets to Hawthorne are very unsafe and narrow, some of which have no sidewalks, and it makes it difficult and unsafe for people to, pedestrians, children, whatever, to be out on the street on bikes or on foot. And we see a lot of traffic is already extremely busy coming through that corridor because, again, not an expert, but the only way to virtually to get from Hawthorne Road in that part of town to get to a stoplight, if you want to go downtown or north or anywhere, you have to come to Country Club Road stoplight to get there because you can't get out on Hawthorne Road. You're unable to turn left. It's the only way to go, so we have a lot of traffic already coming through those narrow streets already.
Have you ever observed traffic at the Country Club Road stoplight access?
Yes.
How would you describe the traffic waiting to turn from the stoplight at Country Club Road intersection?
It gets quite busy at different times of day. You have to wait through more than one signal at some times. It's really narrow. People trying to turn into or onto Country Club Road off of Oleander. It's really narrow there. There are two lanes, a turn and a straight lane going out of Country Club. So it's quite a dangerous intersection, and trucks have trouble making that turn now.
And just to be clear, is it fair to say that you've kind of been the figurehead for the neighborhood regarding the variance request that's before the board today?
Figurehead, yes. I'm part of a group that has tried to lead an effort to inform the neighborhood as a whole, not just Hawthorne Road. So I guess that's correct, yes.
Okay. Along Hawthorne Road, whether it's adjoining or adjacent to the subject property, how many folks have signed up to oppose the variance application before the board today?
Hawthorne Road residents, approximately almost 60 now, persons. And overall in our neighborhood on the adjoining streets and even across Independence and Lincoln Forest, probably about 250 people now have signed on.
And for the record, are you opposed to Mr. Spitrino's variance application today to increase the maximum building height from 35 feet to 40 feet?
Absolutely, yes.
What is your understanding, having listened to Mr. Spitrino today, is the reasons for his variance request?
Again, I'm not an expert, I'm a layperson, but it seems that he is trying to achieve, I know he says because of trees, but I think he's trying to achieve the additional height so he can build an aesthetically pleasing, three-story building, aesthetically pleasing to the new owners, to a buyer, not to the residents behind him. So it seems that it's a way to get to the next step of rezoning. That's what it appears like to me.
Are you generally familiar with how high 35 feet is, sir?
Yes, sir.
Do you see any 35-foot single-family homes around where you live, sir?
Actually, yes, there are some over towards Country Club Road, but not anywhere near the Hawthorne area.
And from listening to Mr. Spatrino today, is it your understanding that he's wanting to eventually use this height increase under the guise of saving trees to go in for rezoning for multifamily, higher density townhomes?
Again, it appears that way to me.
Do you oppose that effort if that were to come about?
Absolutely.
And can you just describe for the board some of the specific concerns you have, whether you have any safety risk and concerns with higher density townhomes being built eventually on the subject tract?
Yes, a couple of concerns. One is privacy. The people, I have a daughter who lives on that street, and it's a privacy issue also. You build a 40-foot or even a 35-foot tall building, you know, just a few scant feet away, no farther than me and that thing, away from their property line, there's going to be people staring straight down into their backyard, and those people have no privacy whatsoever if you allow that height structure to go in there. And I don't think saving a couple of trees around that building is going to have any impact on the actual privacy those people enjoy.
Do you believe that townhomes, whether they're 35 feet or 40 feet in height, are harmonious with the folks in the neighborhood, Hawthorne Road, and where you live, sir?
No, scale, both from a scale and design standpoint, it does not fit at all with the existing neighborhood around it.
Thank you, Mr. Keith. I don't have any further questions for you at this time, but Mr. Spatrino may.
Hey, Mr. Keith, how are you? Thank you for attending today and for bringing the neighbors. I have been working hard to try to get in front of as many of you as possible, so I have the audience I guess I always wanted. I think one of the things that, I've got several questions, but one in particular, you said your neighborhood is unsafe. You find yourself, you fear for your safety in your neighborhood? What makes it so unsafe? I wasn't aware.
Comment on the streets. I'm talking about concern about traffic on the street. If you're bicycling or walking, then there are safety concerns.
Is that a South Oleander issue, or is that a kind of a Wilmington issue?
Could be Wilmington. I'm just speaking to South Oleander.
Okay, and in your experience in South Oleander, it's a dangerous area to be walking around, maybe because no sidewalks, maybe?
On certain streets.
On certain streets. What do you think is the most dangerous street?
Probably Highland and probably the curve on Canterbury.
Oh, okay, sure. That makes sense. I think one of the things that you also mentioned, and again, I wasn't going to really talk about traffic. I was going to save that for where it kind of really mattered. But you mentioned, Hawthorne really only has 2 outlets. Hawthorne has an outlet at Canterbury. Hawthorne has an outlet, but I wouldn't call it much of an outlet right there at Oleander. I don't go that way. That's kind of a tough spot.
I agree.
I mean, if it's not a busy day, you can kind of make it, but you're not going to go left. You're only going to go right, and that's if you're lucky. I mean, really, if you need to get over to the Chick-fil-A, you're playing Frogger to get to it. So I think one thing I'm struggling with, and since you represent so many people, maybe you can help me understand it. It sounds like you believe that maybe Mayfair or Church or Gillette should be opened up to relieve some of that traffic. Is that kind of what you're recommending?
No, it's not.
Well, again, I'm not clear, because I met with a bunch of owners, and they said they didn't want that to happen, but they also recognize that there's going to be homes there, and those homes either need to exit into the neighborhood or they need to exit onto Independence. And if I exit on Independence, unfortunately, I'm probably going to have to do that connector street. So I guess what I really want to understand, because a lot of our designs, and I want to remind it, I'll use it as a public service announcement, Monday and Tuesday, we have a public meeting, both days, open house. Now,
He needs to ask a question and not testify.
So what I'll finalize on that is, you mentioned that there's limited egress on Hawthorne. I just want to make sure. You recognize there's limited egress. There's limited ways out of Hawthorne, and you find that concerning.
Well, based on the population and the density and the homes there presently, it seems to be fine. If you add a lot more people, it's going to be a...
Sure, yeah. I mean, if it's 0 now, even 1 or 2 is a 200% increase. I get it. I'm with you. But I think one of the other things that I really am unclear, because, I know how
Just
tall
ask
this
a question and stop testifying as to
Mr.
whether
Grady,
you're unclear or not.
Thank you. Mr. Petrino, can you ask the question, please?
How are you impacted by an increase in height? The height's 35. How are you impacted?
Privacy and aesthetics.
I'm 6.
I know, I understand.
So
I know what 5 feet is.
5 feet 5 feet changes everything.
It changes it somewhat, yeah.
Okay. Again, I mean, it's,
I guess we'll continue in a question.
okay.
Directed, please.
Maybe I'll ask it this way then. If not something that we're proposing, what would you like to see happen?
First, let me say that I do not speak directly for all these people in this room. I've helped organize the information campaign.
Well,
which-
I understand.
and
Let
I-
him,
and
Mr.
I-
Spino, let him
also,
quit and
it's-
finish.
I just want to let you know that every communication you've sent that I've seen, I've made sure to resend to everybody on our list, so that it's not filtered information. I think that most people I have spoken with prefer a less dense development, obviously something closer to a dram tree or something like that. That's assuming that the land's going to be developed.
So a neighborhood full of patio homes is probably the most desirable that is not connected to Independence.
No, I think there's still concerns about the traffic coming out of there no matter
Oh,
what.
sure.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be able to get you both. Okay. Again, I got a bunch of questions, but I get it. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Keith, would you prefer to see single-family homes as presently zoned in the R15 for this subject property over anything else?
Yes.
If the land can even be built upon, because you don't know, because you haven't had an opportunity yet to look at the title records regarding this property, is that correct?
Correct.
But if you had to increase density and go along with it, you could possibly support development similar to Dram Tree.
I could personally say that, yes, just personally.
Thank you, Mr. Keith. Any more questions by Mr. Spatrino?
Mr. Petrino, anything else for Mr. Keith?
No, but I do need to correct a statement I made earlier. I misspoke. I can build townhomes in R15. I just don't want to. I don't want you to think I can't. I just don't think it's a good idea.
And that's something we can bring back in your rebuttal.
Okay,
Thank you.
I feel like I need to raise that question.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Grady, your next person?
Is Christine Hughes here? Ms. Hughes, have you been sworn in already? Okay, we probably need to do that.
Could you swear, Ms. Hughes? Is there anyone else in the audience that will be testifying that may not have been?
I would say it might be easier to do it this way. So I'm going to try and see if I can streamline it, because once everybody's saying the same thing, and then they'll raise their hands.
I got you. All right, thanks.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Good afternoon, Ms. Hughes. Will you state your name and address, please?
Christine Hughes, 1843 Hawthorne Road.
And Ms. Hughes, did you used to work for the city?
I did.
In what capacity?
For 17 years, I served as a planner in the Long Range Planning Department. I was the primary author of the comprehensive plan and one of the principal authors of the new land development code.
Were you involved in the tree preservation ordinance that was discussed earlier today?
Inasmuch as it's contained in the new land development code, I was involved.
Okay. Were you here when Mr. Spatrino was testifying today about the reasons for his desired variance and the tree preservation ordinance and his claim of a conflict?
Yes.
Do you agree with that testimony, that there is a conflict between the tree preservation provisions with anything else in the code that warrants a hardship variance?
There's not a material conflict in terms of the technical standards of the code.
Now, your property where you live there full-time?
I do.
And how long have you lived there?
I've lived there for 6.5 years.
And is your property actually physically touching the subject tract as adjoining, or is it across Hawthorne Road as adjacent?
I'm immediately adjacent to the subject property at the corner of Hawthorne and Gillette.
So your property bounds the subject tract?
Yes, my backyard abuts the subject property.
Have you reviewed Mr. Spatrino's application?
I have.
Are you in favor of his variance request from 35 feet to 40 feet for this R15 tract?
As I was able to tell him personally, I am not in support of the height increase.
And given your experience with the city of Wilmington and now present day, why are some of the reasons you do not support Mr. Spatrino's variance request?
A three-story tall building behind my home would represent, especially that close to my home, would represent an invasion of privacy, essentially. I would be faced with noise and light that would not be expected from a one- or two-story single-family home. It would significantly change my quality of life. I'm not here to talk about the rezoning request. I'm really focused right now on the potential height increase and the impact that that would have on my home personally, on me personally, my quality of life, but also all the homes on Hawthorne Road.
Have you ever heard the term upzoning during your stint with the city of Wilmington?
Yes.
What is upzoning?
When a property is rezoned from a district that allows a certain level of intensity to a higher level of intensity zoning classification.
And does the city's comprehensive plan identify tracts of land that could be eligible for upzoning?
Yes, there are several maps in the comprehensive plan that identify specific tracts of land that could be suitable for upzoning.
Is the tract that's before the Board of Adjustment today that Mr. Spatrino is seeking his variance for a tract that's identified as one for upzoning?
It is not specifically identified as suitable for upzoning.
Now, you've heard Mr. Spatrino say that his ultimate mission is to go for a rezoning for townhomes and a different zoning classification for this subject property. Have you heard that?
I heard that, yes.
And his testimony has been that what he's going to seek is higher density. Have you heard that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any safety concerns being a resident adjoining the property if higher density for townhomes were allowed on the subject property?
Particularly related to access to my property, I have a lot of concerns. Since Gillette is currently a dead end, my driveway and Lanny Harrell's driveway are the only two driveways on this portion of Gillette. So my ability to back out of my driveway could become impaired, to be determined by what design ultimately gets developed there. But it certainly would change the level of safety that I have in my own vehicle movements. And then, of course, an increase in population brings an increase in vehicular traffic, which would potentially be of concern.
And with the increase in vehicular traffic for high-density multifamily on the subject property, which Mr. Spatrino says is his goal, would that be more traffic than building the property to the extent it can be built? We don't know that. But is that going to be more traffic than single-family R15 presently zoned property?
It's certainly a potential.
And that would depend on the number of units that could be built with R15 versus how many units you might be able to squeeze onto the property for rezoning. Is that correct?
Correct.
What does the abbreviation ITE mean to you?
Institute of Traffic Engineers.
During your stint with the city, did you have the occasion to review the ITE?
Yes.
Okay. Did you become familiar with its standards?
Yes, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I have reviewed, yes.
And did you review the ITE standards in advance of today concerning possible trips per dwelling unit if Mr. Spatrino was to ultimately get his way on a rezoning for multifamily townhomes?
Yes, I did.
And did you, in doing that, find that 100 townhomes would generate 5.44 trips per day per unit, equating to 544 trips per day if there were 100 townhomes?
Yes, that's the ITE metric for what they describe as a mid-rise unit.
And to the present day, have you seen any submittals by Mr. Spatrino for the subject property that would have ingress and egress to the subject tract going and coming solely off of Independence Boulevard?
Exclusively off of Independence? I've not seen that.
Have you
no.
seen anything to suggest that there would be any access directly to the property straight off of Independence Boulevard?
I have not seen that from the current iteration. We have talked about that as a possibility. My concern is that if the fire department sees fit to require access off of Independence Boulevard, that's a final determination, if you will.
Were you here a few minutes ago when Mr. Keith was testifying about his observations of the traffic congestion for South Live Oak and the Country Club Road intersection?
Yes.
Have you yourself seen traffic congestion backed up at the Country Club Road access light?
Certainly, when I work downtown, that's the way that I would access the ability to turn left onto Oleander Drive. So that was a daily part of my round-trip commute. I also experienced traffic backed up at Independence and Canterbury. When the school zone light is flashing, there are times when you can sit through 2 to 3 cycles of that light without any movement. When there's a collision or a backup at Independence and Oleander, which is unfortunately not terribly uncommon, and traffic is coming through the neighborhood as the only option through, it can be very difficult to make a left turn.
Are you generally familiar with how tall 35 feet is?
Generally.
Okay. Did you hear Mr. Keith testify about how there were 1 or 2 homes in the neighborhood that were maybe 35 feet high?
I did hear that.
Okay. Do you agree with that?
There are some homes in the neighborhood that may be 35 feet tall. On Hawthorne Road, I can think of one that may be 35 feet tall.
The rest of them are below 35 feet?
That's my assessment, yes.
Do you know whether there's any restrictive covenants that limit the size of the homes in the Hawthorne area to 2.5 stories in height?
I'm not aware of any restrictive covenants. The deed for my property does reference some design standards from the original subdivision plat.
Do you believe that if townhomes were ever allowed, like Mr. Spatrino is asking for eventually, based on his presentation today, do you believe those townhomes, whether at 35 feet or 40 feet, would be harmonious with your property?
I don't think a 35-foot or 40-foot townhome addresses the context of the existing neighborhood. I don't believe it would be harmonious.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes. I don't have any other questions for you at this time. Mr. Spatrino may.
Hey, Christine, real quick, and with all respect, Ms. Hughes, I will try not to state anything. I'll just ask you questions, even though I know you already know the answer. First of all, big fan. With regard to the city of Wilmington, Christine was very instrumental in a lot of my professional success, so it's kind of interesting to be kind of sitting across from her. Were you involved in the comprehensive plan that celebrates 7 years this month?
Yes, I was the primary author.
When you went through the comprehensive plan, did you ever have a chapter about trees?
There's a lot of information about trees in the plan, yeah.
How about connectivity?
Yep.
How about transitional uses?
Yes.
Have you ever heard the term missing middle?
Yes.
So what is on the south side of Independence?
On the
east side of Independence?
On the east side of Independence, directly across from me is the mall.
The mall, big, would you say?
Yes, quite loud.
And then
Not very attractive.
And on your street, it is predominantly
Single-family homes.
one of the comprehensive plans that you worked on it and did, again, big fan, great job. But you talk at length about transitional uses between heavy, especially commercial uses, or even industrial office building, and then residential. So would you say that Independence might be someplace that would need some type of transitional use?
It could potentially, considering the context of what's on both sides of Independence, there could potentially be some kind of transition, yes.
So some type of transition. It doesn't have to be single-family homes to be transitional as you go from the mall to your house.
Right, strictly speaking, it wouldn't necessarily, a transition wouldn't necessarily have to be single-family homes, but whatever that transition would be would consider the context of the single-family homes as well as the context of the rest of the surrounding development.
You mentioned that there is no overlay or node map that specifically addresses how that massive infill site should be addressed. Why?
I don't know why.
I mean, I'm hoping there's no conflict, but did you leave it off intentionally?
No, at the time that we wrote the plan, I didn't live in that neighborhood, so it wasn't, if the inference is that I was taking a personal interest in that, I wasn't a property owner there at the time. As you know, we lived downtown for quite a long time, and 12 years I spent living downtown, and I really enjoyed the vibrancy and the noise and sort of all the things that go along with being downtown, much as you did as well. We chose to move to this neighborhood to get away from that vibrancy and to find something a little bit more quiet and frankly to be able to kind of spread out a little bit. So, it's fair to say that that tract of land may have been left off of the comprehensive plan maps because it was perceived to be part of the South Oleander neighborhood that would be developed in a coordinating manner.
So you do see that vacant land as part of South Oleander?
I believe that it was part of the original plat in some context. I can't swear to that.
Would you feel more comfortable if the future development felt more like your street?
I would be more comfortable with something that was closer to the current development pattern on Hawthorne.
Okay. One thing with regard to, and just hypothetically, if you were still a planner, would you want the zoning to stay R15, or would you seek, and I know that you're conflicted, but if you put yourself in the position as maybe even your past coworkers are doing now, what zoning is appropriate for that type of transitional location?
Fair question, and I think that the answer depends on the actual proposed development. As you have already mentioned, there is a way to do townhomes in the R15, so a blanket statement that R15 is the only option, having the advantage of knowing the code, I don't know that R15 should be the only answer. If I had my way, obviously I would love to buy it myself and preserve it. I don't have those kinds of resources. I don't have a clear, quick, easy answer for that question.
And it's fair. It's a tough question. It's a tough question, but maybe I'll ask it differently, like I asked Mr. Keith. I mean, if not something that includes townhomes, is it patio homes like Dramtree?
Dramtree. I mean, my ideal, frankly, would be something that, it is really cold in here, so I'm sorry, I'm shivering a little bit. My ideal would be something that accesses Independence only and doesn't send traffic through the neighborhood, and that puts a separation between some space between our backyards along Hawthorne and your property or your subject property. That's a tough site. I don't know how to make that work. I'm not an engineer. I wasn't smart enough to go to engineering school. I had to become a planner.
You bought your home, you said 6 years ago?
About, yep.
God, it seems like that's crazy. So what did you think was going to happen in your I mean, you're smart. You do this for a living. What did you think might happen in your backyard? I mean, it's a dead-end street. It's been like that a long time, but you're not an idiot. You knew something was going to happen.
Well, thank you. Yeah, certainly we were aware of the potential that lot could be developed. There was some comfort in knowing that it was zoned R15, which is the same zoning as my home. So, you hope in that situation that it would be developed as zoned if it gets developed.
So keeping it R15 would be your preference?
Keeping it trees would be my preference. Keeping it green space, keeping it undeveloped would be my real preference. Again, I can't make that happen.
And just for a pause, I do want to just remind everyone in the room that the variance is purely based on a height, based on the current zoning. So just moving forward.
So you mentioned earlier that you can tell how tall homes are around you. Can you also tell, like, let's say there was a 35-foot home behind your house. How far away would it need to be before you, and there's a lot of trees, but how far away would it need to be, or how deep should that buffer be to make you feel better about privacy, safety, security, and that big, high 35-foot building behind you?
If we're talking 35 feet,
Is there a formula that you guys use in the planning department? Pythagorean's theorem? I mean, anything?
yeah, you know, in fairness to the process of writing the land development code, I feel compelled to say that we did consider a lot of iterations of what an appropriate buffer, an appropriate transition looks like. I don't know that everything came out perfectly. I can tell you everything didn't come out perfectly. That's the nature of the process. Mr. Newman is on record criticizing just about every aspect of the new land development code. He hated everything we put out there. You supported a lot of it. You criticized a lot of it. That's fair. It was a huge undertaking. So do we get it perfect? No. Did I write it and walk away and leave my colleagues to enforce it? Yes. So, you know, I don't know what the right answer is. I would feel comfortable, you know, if you consider the existing requirements for setbacks in the R15, meeting those standards with a 35-foot tall building.
So, which are, I think that front setback is 30 feet?
That sounds correct? 20? 20 feet.
Gee, that's close. I mean, I wasn't even thinking that close. So you're saying if the home was 20 feet from your property line, that would
Well,
be
if
less?
it met the setback standards for R15, I wouldn't really have any method to object.
I understand. I guess what I was hoping to get from you was how far away should any homes be, or how much buffer should be there, so that you don't feel so put upon, or, I mean, I don't want anyone to, I mean, fear their privacy or feel inundated. I mean, you should feel comfortable in your own home, but where's the right spot?
Sure, I mean, fair question. Without seeing a site plan, it's hard for me to give you a
Okay.
like, firm answer.
So you are coming to the public meeting on Monday or Tuesday?
Okay, let's
Oh,
stay-
last question.
let's stay focused, please.
Last question, and I'll wrap up. In your experience, and again, you've been at this a long time, 17 years, in this room, have you ever seen council reduce the existing height limit currently? I mean, have you ever seen them say, look, the height's 35, but we don't like 35, let's make it 15?
Yes.
Okay. So council has the ability to say, we're going to squash that height down, and that's a good idea.
I would defer to Ms. Huffman on procedural issues, but in my experience, the city council can, on a conditional rezoning consideration, require something to be less intense than the code would permit, but they could not require it to be more intense than the code would permit.
So just so I'm clear, you can get less, but you can't get more,
Potentially.
which might explain the reason why we're in front of Board of Adjustment.
Well, that's
All
absolutely
right,
what we're-
I'd never want to stop anyone from asking and answering questions, but we are getting way off track. So I'd like everyone to really understand that we need to focus back on why we're here. And so I want to give you a little, if you have any more questions for,
Thank you, Christine. Thank you very much.
all right, thank you. Sir, do you have any?
No further questions for Ms. Hughes.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to call Robert Ruffner. Robert, have you been sworn in already? I'm sorry? Have you been sworn in already? Okay. Mr. Ruffner, will you state your name and your address, please?
Robert F. Ruffner Jr., 1801 Hawthorne Road. I'm adjacent to the subject property.
When you say adjacent, is your property physically touching and not separated by a road, physically touching the subject property?
It physically touches it. I look out my kitchen window at this property
Okay. How long have you lived at your home, sir?
since 1985.
Do you rely upon things like zoning ordinances when you purchased your property as to what was going to be behind you?
Well, at the time, I realized it was R15, and I assumed it would be single-family and probably never developed.
Have you heard about Mr. Spatrino's variance application today of seeking to raise the maximum building height from 35 feet to 40 feet?
I'm sorry?
Have you heard that Mr. Spatrino's variance application is seeking to raise the height from 35 feet to 40 feet?
I read his application, and if he gets the variance, these buildings will be taller than the mall at Belk's.
They will be what? I'm sorry.
They will be taller than the mall at Belk's.
And you know that because you yourself went to the mall and measured the height of the belt of the.
I went over and counted brick.
You went over to the mall and you counted the height for Belk, I think you said, right?
Well, the mall is 40 feet tall.
Do you oppose Mr. Spatrino's variance application, sir?
Yes, I oppose it.
Okay. Kind of give some reasons as a person whose kitchen window looks out at this property. Tell the board some of the reasons why you would oppose this building height variance request by Mr. Spatrino.
Well, he can build these buildings 15 feet from my property line, and they're going to be significantly tall. And in my estimation, it will reduce the value of my property. He'll end up making money, I'll lose money, and I don't see any fairness there.
If it's built as R15 under the current height limitation, are you okay with that? If it's capable of being built without restrictive covenants that block it from being built?
Whatever's allowed is allowed, and I can't fight whatever's allowed. I can fight what's not allowed.
Okay, and you would oppose a rezoning to increase the
Absolutely.
density and add multifamily higher density, is that correct?
I oppose the rezoning, I oppose turning all the traffic into our neighborhood, and I oppose the height. It doesn't fit our neighborhood.
Do you believe the height increase, just purely the height increase from 35 feet to 40 feet is harmonious with all of the other homes around where you live?
Well, I got called bull on the saving the trees. He's already written us a letter telling us that he wants to build up to 100 units. By being taller with a smaller footprint, he can get more units on the property. So it has nothing to do with trees.
Well, the homes that are around you, including yours, sir, are any of them, how many of them would you say are almost 35 feet or right at 35 feet in height?
On Hawthorne Road, there may be one.
And everybody else is below that height limit?
Well, my house is one story. The house across the street from me is 1.5 stories. Most of them are one, there are a few 2 stories.
Do you believe townhomes, if they were allowed, as Mr. Spatrino has forecasted he wants to do you believe those townhomes on this subject property would be harmonious with your home and your property, sir?
No.
Have you ever witnessed traffic congestion at the Country Club Road intersection?
Yes.
Is it good? Is it bad? Is it, how congested is the traffic there, sir?
Well, that's from our side of the neighborhood, if you're going downtown, that's the only stoplight.
And that's important because why?
I'm sorry?
The only stoplight, is it because you go to the stoplight because of how difficult it is to turn left on Oleander?
There used to be a stoplight at the termination of Hawthorne Road and Oleander, and the state took that out. Traffic backs up there, sometimes 2 blocks. So a lot of times if I'm going to Hanover Center, I go around the block to get towards downtown to be able to get behind that traffic. So if you're going downtown, you don't want to cross traffic, you go to stoplight.
I don't have any further questions of Mr. Ruffner at this time. Mr. Spatrino may have a few for you, sir.
You're good.
Okay. Hey, Mr. Ruffner, good to see you. How's your back? Better? Good, good. You've lived there since 1985. That's right. You told me that. You said, though, that in 1985 you thought it would probably never be developed. How come? You said in 1985 when you moved there, you said that you thought it would never be developed. How come?
Because I told you I thought it was single-family R-15.
No, but you said you never thought it'd be developed.
I didn't think anybody wanted to build a house.
Mr. Ruffner, can you speak into the microphone? We're having trouble hearing you.
I didn't think anybody wanted to build a house across from the mall. I had no idea that it would be multi-units.
Sure, sure. I'm with you. And you've lived there since 1985. Is the traffic worse today than it was in 1985?
Certainly.
Why?
More people here.
More people are here, and they're all over the place. They just keep
That
coming.
got to do with height of units.
Sir, okay, let's get, once again, no, everyone, just 1 second, please. When I'm done, then you'll have a chance to talk. Want to stay focused, once again, on the fact that we're here for a variance. And I appreciate the information. I do not want to do anything that impedes either side. But we need to stay focused. We don't need to have banter back and forth. We can ask a question and answer, and we move forward. And that's all I'm asking. Mr. Petrino, can you ask your question? And Mr. Ruffman, will you answer it, please?
I apologize for being argumentative.
You're fine.
But I truly don't trust Mr. Petrino.
Well, that is right, sir. That's once again, we're in a quasi-judicial. What you say is actually on the record. What you say, you are responsible for. So just so we have that,
it on the record.
then we're clear. Mr. Petrino, do you have any more questions for Mr.?
Well, I'm curious now. Did I do something to prevent?
Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm stopping that right there.
How about let's
question
just-
related to your your application,
My last
please.
question. You are at the intersection of Churchill and Hawthorne.
Correct. That's correct.
And one of your biggest concerns when we spoke was you did not want to see Hawthorne connected to Independence.
That would be my note. I do not want to see these units on this property connected to Hawthorne or Gillette or Mayfair in any sense.
But under current
Do that when we met in January.
R15 zoning, would you be able to connect to those locations? You're a building expert.
Why can't you dump them into Independence like everybody else has done on the street?
This is not really logical, but okay.
Independence East, Dramtrick,
Okay.
all.
I have no more questions.
Again,
Sorry.
thank you.
Jeff.
Mr. Grady, do you have any follow-up?
I have no further questions of Mr. Ruffner. Thank you,
All
Mr.
right,
Ruffner.
thank you, Mr. Ruffner.
Mr. Hubbs,
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Hubbs, may I think this would be an appropriate time just to remind everyone that we're not here for a rezoning. That is not that is not happening here today. It's not appropriate for the board to consider traffic impact, density. You are not here for that. And it is also, I wanted to remind you that Mr. Spatrino, much has been made about him coming and putting the cart, so to speak, before the horse. The local land development code requires that he come to get any quasi-judicial approvals before he even attempts to go in front of city council. So it's appropriate for him to be here asking for this variance. You can only rule on the variance. And I feel like we're getting a little off topic.
I 100% agree. I have, like I said, we need to focus, and moving forward, I'm just going to be real honest. I'll use the discretion to stop certain situations. We have stuff that we're going to have an evidentiary hearing, which will be very limited, but I don't want anyone not to get information out there, because this is a public record. But we do need to focus on the fact that this is a variance, and it is not a rezoning.
Well, the problem is, okay, you can't have two sets of rules. If Mr. Spatrino had come in front of the board and said, I want a height increase just to save trees for my R15 property, then we'd be fine. But instead, he voluntarily opened the door by saying, I want a height increase because I want to build these townhomes when I come in for a rezoning to get it to look this way and to have this kind of density. And so, look, if the board says that all of that he gave as the justification for his supposed hardship request is not going to be considered by the board, and it's going to be stricken from your consideration, okay, But if it's going to be considered, even though it's not competent and it's not substantial and it's not material evidence, so it shouldn't be considered, then we have a right to defend ourselves and to put on what evidence I've been allowed to do under this quasi-judicial setting for and on behalf of my clients regarding what they can testify about. I mean, at the end of the day, he can't have it both ways. If he had come in here and just said, height variance to save trees, okay, that's not what he's done. He has forecasted what he's wanting to do. And that's the concern that these folks have behind them, in addition to the fact there's no need, there's no hardship for the height increase.
Hang on.
To continue with, yes, sir.
Sorry,
Yes, ma'am.
and so as I've emphasized to you all multiple times during this hearing, you are not to consider anything beyond what you must consider for those 4 findings of fact, whether it come from Mr. Richardson or Mr. Spatrino or anyone else in the audience. Those arguments are best made to both Planning Commission and the legislative body, City Council.
Yes, ma'am. Yep. Agree 100%. Everyone is probably on the same track on that. All right. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm going to call Mr. David Sneeden to the stand. Mr. Sneeden, have you already been sworn in?
I have.
Will you state your name and address, please?
My name's David Sneeden, and I live at 1840 South Live Oak Parkway. I've lived there for the past 13 years. I've lived in the neighborhood for the past 40 years. Prior to living at 1840, I lived at the 100 feet from the intersection of South Live Oak Parkway and Canterbury Road.
Over the course of your past 53 years of living in this area, have you observed single-family homes in the area?
I have.
Do you agree with the testimony we've heard today about how with very few exceptions, the homes that are there are single-family and they are well below 35 feet?
I do agree with that. And in fact, I went around the neighborhood measuring the height of some of these roof lines. And there are only 2 houses in the neighborhood that come close. And one of them's an older house. The other one is probably the most recent house that was constructed on Hawthorne. But they're not, they're just slightly over 30 feet. They're not.
Mr. Sneeden, can I ask that you speak into the mic?
Yes, is this better? I'm sorry. And I'm very familiar with the neighborhood. I'm very familiar with the Oleander Company's developments. I practiced law for 40 years in New Hanover County. Did a lot of title work. I've read all the restrictive covenants for Country Club Pines, Oleander, South Oleander, Oleander Extension, Lincoln Forest, and they're very consistent. The McCrae's did a very good job of developing a large area with a unified theme and very consistent restrictions. And the restrictions for that large area, which runs just about from, well, it runs from Acacia Drive, Columbus Circle, all the way to 41st Street, where Lincoln Forest backs up to 41st Street and hit Winter Park Gardens. Everything south of Oleander Drive to Shipyard Boulevard along Independence, except for the very tail end of Independence where it hit Shipyard on Bruce Cameron's property, was all McCrae property. And they were always very sensitive to height restrictions. All those restrictive covenants limit the height to 2.5 stories. Very few houses on Hawthorne Road are 2 stories. But the height limit is 2.5 stories for sections B, C, and D of South Oleander Estates. When they sold the property to Alderman School, when they sold the property to First Baptist Church for the Baptist Center, which is at both on that intersection of Canterbury and Independence Boulevard, they restricted those uses to educational purposes for the school and church purposes for the First Baptist Center. But they also went a step further, and they said, should these properties be discontinued from these two institutional uses, a school or church, then the restrictive covenants that applied to Section C of Lincoln Forest would apply to the church, and the restrictive covenants to the adjoining property, which is also Section C of Lincoln Forest, would apply to the school. So the four corners, well, three of the four corners at Canterbury and Independence have those residential restrictions on them. The only corner that does not have it is the corner that Mr. Petrino is seeking his variance on, and that strip of land was carved out. Hugh McRae drew where that Independence Boulevard was going to go. He donated it to the state. The state didn't pay him one penny for it, but they allowed him to design where it was going to go and to name the road. And so he drew it exactly where it would intersect, where the mall could be built by the Metropolitan Development, Inc., and exactly where it would be a uniform distance backing up to Hawthorne Road. I always assumed it was probably a restricted buffer. I know Mr. McRae lived on South Live Oak, 2 blocks from that strip when he did this, and he had some relatives that also lived over in the same area close by. But I always assumed that it was probably restricted in some way. And it may be. I have not done a thorough examination of it, but I'm not aware of any restrictions. So I think the current zoning, R15, with the current height restrictions, are probably what Mr. Petrino needs to work with. Now, he says, and I respect, I think he does a good job, and I think he's tried to be very forthcoming on this whole situation. But he says he wants some direction from the board. In my opinion, he has the direction from the board. The code, the building code and the zoning code give him all the parameters of what he can expect to build there. I don't know a thing about the trees, except for I think we're going to lose probably 85% of those trees, because you can't put more than 2 to 3 inches of dirt or do grading around the base of a tree and it'll die. I don't see him being able to accomplish that. I love trees. I'd love to see him retain as many as he can, but I'm more concerned about height limitation than I am the trees. And it's going to change the character of our neighborhood. Our neighborhood's been there since the late 1920s, 1930s, and it's grown all the way up through the 70s, and it's been very consistent with consistent height limitations. It's a good neighborhood. It's the type of neighborhood that is creating the demand that people want to move to Wilmington. That's what they're seeking. They're not seeking a tunnel effect with big apartment buildings going down the road where you feel like you're in a large metropolitan city. Our citizens are fleeing from that, and that's why the traffic's so bad. I'll be glad to answer any other questions, but there are 2 developments that were developed from McRae property, and they bookend this property. They're contiguous with each end of it. One of them is at the corner, the southwest corner of Park Avenue and Independence Boulevard. It's a small lot patio home subdivision called Independence Court. And its access is off Independence Boulevard, and then on the other end, on the south end, at Canterbury and Independence, built on McCray property is Dramtree. And I think there are 4 or 5 units in there. Both those projects are one story. Both of them are very tastefully done. There's a tremendous market for that. And if, you know, Mr. Petrino could do something along those lines, or something like, I'm trying to think, Drayton Square, Independence East, all those units are in very high demand. Now, I have some photographs that I can briefly show you of Dramtree and Independence Court that will show you what a one-story unit looks like that has access off of Independence Boulevard. There's no hardship in this case. He can develop the plan under the current zoning, under the current height limitations, and he can do a lot more than was done at Dramtree or at Independence Court. There's just absolutely no hardship in this case. And I know he could make more money if he could have a smaller footprint and a higher building, but as someone said earlier today, that's at the expense of the neighbors whose values are going to decrease, and they're going to lose their privacy.
I would assume that all of the board is familiar with Dramtree and Sterling Place in this area. Don't need to see the pictures, but he's got them on a flash drive, and we can show the pictures for illustrative purposes if you'd like.
Does anyone need, we all are very, very familiar with that, but I do appreciate, thank you for the offer, sir.
That's fine. I gave those photos to the clerk.
Yeah,
So,
I want us to get more focused on the variance and the height.
but
Thank you.
I think my point's taken, and you can easily develop one-story houses on this property, much less develop it with 35-foot height limitation, which he has a right to do.
Yeah, and so we'll go back to Mr. Grady, focusing on the.
I have no
the-
further
yes.
questions of Mr. Sneeden at this time. David, Mr. Petrino may have some questions for you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sneeden. Thank you for kind of the reference and the history. I enjoy hearing some of the history of what's going on, but I have no questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sneeden, you're good to go. Thank you. So this brings us to a point where I've given you 4 or 5 witnesses, and you've heard what the flavor is. There are several more folks in here. I'm not planning on calling anyone else. I'm sure that somebody might want to come up here, like Mr. Warschauer, I believe. But for those who have stuck around that oppose the project, could you just stand up for the board and raise your hand and let them know that you're against the variance application today? So in an effort, I mean, I'm going to spitball and say there's at least 50 folks in the audience that just stood up in opposition.
And as a reminder to the board, this is not a popularity contest. You are bound by those 4 findings of fact and not how many people are in favor or opposed of this project.
She's correct. I'm just trying to move it along rather than bringing all 50 up here to say generally the same stuff. If there's anyone that would like to speak without me asking questions and to the board in opposition to the application, please feel free to come up here and identify yourself and give a statement of your opposition.
And Mr. Grady, everything that should be something new and relevant.
Agreed, yeah. We don't want more cumulative.
We got traffic.
We got traffic,
We've talked about
noise,
safety. We've talked
lights.
about the history and that. We are here focused solely on there's 4 findings of fact. We can only make a decision on the 4 findings of fact. And additional information should be on how those haven't been met, if they oppose it, or how they've been met for people that support it.
Yeah, for those that didn't hear, if you've got something new to add, not something that's already been discussed today.
Yes, and I won't want to be short, but I will, like, if we are getting repetitive, I have to stop, because this is something you're supposed to be adding new to this. So, but Mr. Grady, your part's still open. Are you good with your
Yes.
presentation? Thank you. We are going to move forward with the evidentiary hearing, and again, I'll remind everyone that this hearing is to provide competent materials and substance evidence related to the matters. And I'll ask those that come forward to talk related to that. And once again, I don't want to suppress someone from talking, but what you come forward needs to be new evidence for us to consider. And like I said, we'll have you approach this podium, your name, your address. We are going to limit this additional part, and I need to be corrected if I'm wrong, but we're going to go to 10 minutes for the additional hearing, and I would ask that we time that. So I would ask you to be conscious of the people that also want to talk. But once we hit the 10 minutes, I will then close that part. All right, sir.
Hello, I'm Leo Warschauer. I live at 1712 Hawthorne Road. I'm across the street from where the development would be. I've been there for 26 years. The development would raise, going from 35 to 40 feet, would impact me in the sense that I have solar panels on my house, and by raising the height, potentially they could impact the sun that I get. And by decreasing the energy that I get to the solar panels, I'd be directly impacted by generating less energy to my panels. Secondarily, having been here for 26 years, when I come out every morning and I go to pick up the paper, I get up, I look out to the east. Normally, I see some trees. I see my neighbor's house, which is a two-story house, and I can see the sun sometimes coming through the trees. But with larger buildings, I will be more obstructed from seeing anything. It is not in character with the neighborhood to have a large development, and higher means you see less. It's more of an urban environment than a suburban environment, which is R15, which is what we're talking about here. So in that sense, I think it's not in character with the neighborhood, which is what we presently have.
All right.
So that's what I wanted to say.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Oh, the other thing is that with the higher height, with Hurricane Florence, I had some damage. And when you have taller buildings, it tends to channel the air through around the buildings. And some of the people who live beside it, and I've had trouble with this before, I had a good bit of damage with the hurricanes. The taller buildings tend to channel the air through it at a higher wind force, and that causes more damage. So,
All right, thank you, sir.
very good.
Good afternoon. My name is Will Gammons. I'm at 1819 Hawthorne Road. My wife and I have recently bought within the past year and a half, so we're fairly new to the neighborhood. I share a lot of thoughts that previous neighbors have contributed so far. The one additional piece that I would like to say is if this piece of development that's being proposed was behind this lot when we were looking, we would not have bought the house that we're in currently, and we would have looked elsewhere at different neighborhoods. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else? All right. Before I close the evidentiary hearing, I'll ask the city if you have anything you'd like to present or add. If we're good on that, then all right. I will then close the evidentiary hearing. We can do rebuttal related to if there's any part of the process. So, and Mr. Petrino, you have the right to, if you have any rebuttal you'd like to.
Thank you. I have nothing to add, just looking for resolution.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Grady?
I just don't have any rebuttal. Do we do summations at the end of this? Or if it's a summation time, I'd like to give that, but.
You certainly can, yes, sir.
Now the time to do that?
Yes, sir, prior to deliberations.
Yeah, because then we'll move into it. So,
Okay.
yes, sir.
Adam Lovelady from UNC School of Government has an article on hardship. In order for Mr. Petrino to get a variance today, he has to show all of the following to get the hardship variance. Unnecessary hardship would result from strict application of the ordinance. You've heard nothing that touches upon that today. It's his desire to build a bigger structure if and when he gets a rezoning, and that's it. He wants to save trees. It's a noble cause, but that's not hardship as a matter of law. It says the hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property. You've heard no evidence from Mr. Spatrino today about that. Hardship is not a self-created hardship. That doesn't apply because there's nothing here that says that Mr. Spatrino has not offered up that there's any peculiar issues with this property that would necessitate having to raise the building height limit from 35 to 40 feet under R15 zoning. Additionally, he must show the variance will be consistent with the intent of the ordinance. The intent of the ordinance is R15 with a 35-foot maximum building height. He's shown you nothing to suggest that his efforts, just simply raising the height, is going to be consistent with the intent. If the intent of the ordinance had been to allow for something greater than 35 feet, the legislative body, city council, would have put that in there, and they did not. You've heard nothing about how it's going to secure public safety, nor how it's going to achieve substantial justice. Mr. Spatrino's burden is to show competent, substantial, and relevant evidence today. Just simply asking for a building height increase because he wants to supposedly save trees under a future rezoning is not sufficient for purposes of a variance. He's offered you nothing in terms of substantial evidence. He says there's a conflict between tree preservation and the other city ordinances, when in fact he's saying, well, no, it's just a preference to save trees, and he's right. Your tree preservation ordinance says that's our preference, as it should be, but if you have to cut them down, there are mitigation factors you must implement. So he hasn't given you any justification for the alleged conflict in the ordinance. The law says that merely showing some hardship is insufficient. I would submit to you he's not offered any hardship evidence, but if he has, it's about some nebulous of cost that he's going to incur to try and move around trees, but he's giving you no information about those costs. And again, he stayed with the contract. When this tree preservation ordinance came down, he stuck with the contract. He's gone into this with his eyes wide open about what the ordinance says, and he should be bound to it absent a showing of a legal hardship under the law. Hardship must be more than mere inconvenience or a preference for a more lenient standard. And I would submit to you that's what he's actually seeking. And that's not a hardship, that's a wish. If he wants to go in and lobby city council for rezoning or for relaxation of the building height limits, he can legislatively try to do that. But that's not properly before this board. I'm sorry to be belaboring the point. I know you're not lawyers, you're not judges, but you are unfortunately a quasi-judicial board, and you're asked to make these difficult decisions. And your law says he hasn't come close to meeting the standards for issuance of a variance, with all due respect. We would ask that you deny the variance and let him go about building on the subject property, either under the current zoning in conformity with the zoning, or to try and get a rezoning later down the road that we can then oppose that as well. Any questions from me?
No, sir.
Thank you for
Anybody?
your time.
All right, thank you. All right, is there anything else to add? All right, we are going to close and then go into discussion and deliberations.
As I said a while back, our charge today is to rule on a 5-foot height variance in an R15 district based on the 4 findings of fact. And I do not see where any of the 4 findings of fact have been met that would allow us really to approve a 5-foot variance request. Based on that, I would make a motion that we deny the 5-foot variance request based on failure to meet the 4 findings of fact.
I'll second. All right, there's a motion and a second. Does anyone have any questions, discussions? right, that being brought, I will vote. All those in favor of the motion to deny the variance, say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Those that are in favor of the ordinance, raise your hand. And so it's 2 to 3, the ordinance, the variance would fail.
The variance would fail.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to item number 6. I'm going to, all right, we're going to, if everyone can come back in, or hello? Just want to make sure you're good with us starting back up. All right, we're going to call back to order the Board of Adjustments meeting. We're on item number 6. It involves the subject property is 223 Keaton Avenue. The variance is for the variance to require maximum height of an accessory structure located on a residential property. Dimension standards in the R17 residential district to the City Code, Chapter 18, Land Development Code, Section 18-199, Sub A, Sub 3. And I'll recognize the city.
Well, good afternoon. I'm going to just go over this information real quick. Property is 223 Keaton Avenue. The subject property is Lot 27 in the Brookwood subdivision, and the property contains 10,424 square feet and also a single dwelling structure that is approximately 2,378 square feet. On December 12, 2018, city staff issued zoning approval for the construction of a 768 square foot, 1.5-story accessory structure in the rear yard. The plans that were submitted with the application indicated that the structure would be 22.25 feet tall at its peak. The permit was approved. City Code Section 18249E, height stated that the height of the accessory building shall not exceed the height of the primary structure or 35 feet, whichever is less. The same general standards was carried over for the current Land Development Code 18-199, dimensional standards for accessory buildings. And structures height, which states that accessory structures shall not exceed the height of the principal building. On or about October 19, 2022, city staff inspected the subject property and was able to determine that the accessory building did not exceed the height of the principal structure and requested that the applicant provide documentation of compliance. On or about January 31st, 2023, the applicant submitted a survey that was prepared by Stuart Y. Benson, professional land surveyor with Cape Fear Surveying, PC, of the height of both the accessory and primary structure, and also submitted a variance request, which staff did accept, for a variance of 3 feet, because the survey indicated that the accessory structure was 3 feet taller than the primary structure. The applicant states that the homeowners relied on the professional building company that was hired to construct the accessory structure in accordance with the Land Development Code and building permit requirements. The applicant also states that confusion and uncertainty arose as to whether the accessory structure exceeded the height of the primary structure due to the steep, significant grade and topographical change from Keaton Avenue to the rear of the property, making it difficult to determine and compare the actual heights of both structures. This was the survey that was submitted by the applicant. As we can see, the differences, and then there is the average grade that was changed. This matter is set before a hearing before the Board of Adjustment today, March 16th, 2023. I would like to say that this is subject to the 4 findings of fact, and that I would like to submit this material and presentation for the record. Would also like to indicate that there was Exhibit A that was missed in the board's packet. You should have all received an updated email on this information prior to this meeting, and we have added it to this PowerPoint to indicate that we did receive it in time. There are 4 pages of information here. The applicant and the appointee for the applicant are present for questions, and staff is ready for questions as well.
All right. Does anyone have any questions right now? All right, well, appreciate it. Thank you. Will the applicant like to?
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Matt Nichols. I'm here today representing the applicants and owners, John and Kathy Lynch. Mr. Lynch is with me here also in the chamber room, as well as our professional land surveyor, Stuart Benson, is here to answer any questions that the board may have about his survey. And we appreciate the opportunity to make a presentation. I realize it's after 4 o'clock, so I will be brief and adjust my presentation accordingly. But I know this is very important to my clients, so I don't want to summarize it too quickly. But if I am moving too fast with the photographs, please let me know. But I think the photographs really explain the situation well. The property is near the corner of the intersection of Metz Avenue and Keaton Avenue, shown here in blue. And you can see from the aerial photograph that the principal structure, which I understand from the staff report was probably built in the 50s, has been there for quite some time. My clients have owned the property for over 40 years. I do want to make a correction in the Exhibit A. We indicated that they resided there for 40 years. They actually resided in Goldsboro for a period of time, but they've owned it for 40 years. I think their son lived there for a while. And when Mr. Lynch retired, they moved back in 2016, but it is their primary residence, and they've lived there for a number of years. And this is Exhibit B in the board's packet, and I'll sort of highlight a couple things here. This is just an enlarged portion of the survey, and then you can see how we got to the point of asking for 3 feet was with building heights in the city of Wilmington. On a pitched roof building, which both the residence and the accessory structure are pitched roofs, you measure from the highest peak, you take the highest peak, you take the highest eave, and then you reach the average or the median there. And so based upon calculations that Mr. Benson performed, the dwelling height is actually 21.37 feet, and the garage height is 24.37 feet, so it just worked out to be exactly 3 feet, and that's what we're respectfully asking the board to consider today. And if you look at the photographs, you can see this is taken from Keaton Avenue. You can see that we've identified the subject property, but there's a couple different grade changes going on there, and I would say for Wilmington, it's a pretty significant grade change. Many of the residential areas in Wilmington are essentially flat or close to being flat, but this part of Keaton actually has quite a bit of grade change. And as you look sort of from this angle, you can see where the neighbor to the north actually has terraced the lawn, because you can see that the grade from Keaton Avenue up to where the houses are on that side of the street is pretty significant. Apologize for being in the photo here, but I just wanted to provide some scale to the board. You can see that's Mr. and Mrs. Lynch's house in the background. You can see the Board of Adjustment sign posted there off to the right. But you can see even from Keaton Avenue to the sidewalk, there's grade change. And then as you go further up to the back of the house, it's, again, it's a pretty steep incline. The accessory building, which incidentally, if you were standing at this portion of Keaton Avenue, you don't really even see the accessory building. It is here, and as we move back to the back of the property, I'll explain why. I think that it adds to the board's consideration. When you're on Keaton, you don't really see it. It's also the way that it's designed with the color and the architecture. I think it's very well done. It doesn't stick out. As you go, again, just to provide some scale, I showed I'm in the picture there, but if you're on Keaton Avenue and you're looking back toward Market Street, Keaton Avenue kind of goes down there. You can see Mr. and Mrs. Lynch's property with the arrow off to the right. And then if you were sort of with your back to Market Street looking towards Metz Avenue, you can see, it's kind of hard to tell in the photos, but it does sort of dip down there. So there's grade changes both in Keaton there, and then as you go on the houses on that side of Keaton to the back. As you move up the driveway, you can see with these photographs that's a pretty good one that shows the grade there. If you can see the brick in relationship to the driveway. And then as you move up the driveway, again, just the grade change. And that really affects the measurement of the house and sort of the perception of it, of how high it is compared to the accessory structure. And you can see here, kind of hard to tell in this photo, but there's two cars, and you can see the car that's parked back where the accessory garage is higher than the car that's parked there at the house. That's if you were at Mr. and Mrs. Lynch's driveway and you were turning around looking back toward Keaton. And then you can see the neighbor again, the terracing of the lawn and just the significant change from the road. Again, you can see the grade change here. The purpose of this photo is really to show too that it has various pitches on the roof. It's not a uniform pitched roof, and so that's how when Mr. Benson did the surveying going from the highest eave to the peak, that's where, and even though the garage visually is higher, and it is higher, the way that you measure under the land development code, it's not that significant of a height difference given the grade change and the way you would measure both of those structures. Here's a little bit more of the house there is on the right side of the picture, and you can see the accessory garage on the left and the grade change from those two. There's the back of the residence. You can see it's, the pitch is not much on the back of the roof. And then that's just another picture just showing the pitch on the roof if the board has questions about the measurement. Those are the two structures in relation to each other. It's hard to tell with the angle. Again, the garage is taller than the house, but just depending on how you look at it, it gives you different views of it. And then there's the house in the front of the picture, and then you can see the garage in the back. I'll stress too, this is not an accessory dwelling unit. It was not designed to be one. My clients are not asking for it to be one. It's purely a garage. So there's no intended residence or dwelling unit in there. I don't think it would meet the requirements. I'll touch on these real quickly, that the neighbor to the south, so the property's on Metz, there's a pretty big grade change from the Lynch's property as you go back towards Metz. You can see the neighbor's shed there on the south, and there's a pretty significant grade change. The accessory garage would be there on the left side of the screen. And then if you were at the intersection of, back out to the street, I've just got a few more photos. If you're on Keaton Avenue looking back towards Market, this is basically at the intersection. You can see some of the grade change there with the wall. And then if you were standing at the intersection of Metz and Keaton and you were looking back towards Forest Hills Drive, that's my client's neighbor to the south. That's the house that's on the corner of Metz and Keaton. And then with these two photos, you'll see the vantage point of my client, the neighboring house to my client's there. You can see sort of the size and structure of that. And you can see my client's accessory structure. Again, it sort of sits up on a hill, so it does appear higher. It is higher. But that was taken fairly recently, so we went to the Google Maps to see in the summer, you can see with the vegetation, I think it's very inconspicuous. It's not really, I don't think you would notice it if you were driving down the road unless you were really looking for it. So the last thing I would point out too is like in the code, in the R7 district, you can build to 35 feet. Both of these structures are well under that. The house itself is measured at 21.37 feet, and the garage is 24.37 feet. So if that lot was empty, you could build up another 10 feet easily on the house, and you could build up another 7 or so feet approximately on the accessory unit. So while we're asking for a height variance, and we would require one under the code, we're not asking for a height variance to go above what you are allowed to do in that district. Both of these structures are still significantly less than what is allowed. For purposes of harmony with the neighborhood, if you were to look at a couple houses just in the immediate vicinity, we've highlighted Mr. and Mrs. Lynch's house is shown in blue. If you look at the house that's in purple, it has the tax address of 216 218 Keaton. So to give you the relation, it's not directly across the street, but it's basically diagonal across the street, and you'll see that they have both a principal structure and an accessory structure. I think that might be as an ADU, explaining the two addresses, but I think that looks very nice, and that's very consistent with the neighborhood. And that's 2 stories in the back versus probably 1.5 on the house, but again, looks very nice. And then if you were to take another example, again, Mr. and Mrs. Lynch's property shown in blue. If you were to go 2 doors, basically 3 doors down toward Market Street at 211 and 215 Keaton, so again, just right in the immediate vicinity, again, you'll see a house with an accessory dwelling unit that's taller than the principal structure. This, to me, looks very nice. It's very consistent with the neighborhood, and I think you'll see that type of arrangement throughout the neighborhood in Places and Forest Hills. So with that being said, I'm glad to go through the 4 factors, Mr. Chairman. We lay those out in the Exhibit A. If the board needs a copy of that Exhibit A, we did bring copies of that. Mr. Benson's here to answer any questions about his survey. I would just respectfully contend that this does meet the criteria for the variance. I think this is a classic case where my clients relied upon the professional builder to build this. The lot is unusual in the sense that the topography is unique, and it would be definitely an unnecessary hardship and I think a big hardship to have to adjust that building by 3 feet. I don't think it would serve any real practical purpose. It probably wouldn't. It would be very expensive to take 3 feet off of that building. It's not going to look as nice as it does now, and I don't think you would notice any difference from just walking down the street or driving down the street. So I would respectfully contend that it really just doesn't serve any practical purpose, and it was just an unfortunate incident that came up, and we respectfully are requesting a variance, and we appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions of Mr. Nichols? All right, thank you. All right, we will move on to the evidentiary hearing. And I'll go ahead and open up, and we would ask that anyone with any information that's competent material and substantive evidence related to this matter, please come forward. All right, so being that there aren't any, is there anything else from the city related to this matter? Okay. Mr. Nichols, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, my client's here if you have questions, and Mr. Benson's here to answer any of the board's questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
While we're still, before I close, anything? All right. Anything? All right, we'll go ahead and close the evidentiary hearing. And being that no rebuttals or anything of that nature, we'll move forward. So deliberation, up to the board on discussion, thoughts?
I went by the property, and it is difficult to see the accessory structure from the road. You can see it from the right side of the house, and you can see it from Metz through the trees. So it's not intrusive at all. So.
I went through the 4 findings of fact, and I think it makes sense to make a motion to approve the variance.
All right, so is that as a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the 3-foot variance at
223.
223 Keaton Avenue for the accessory dwelling.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
May I make a
Oh, sorry.
really loud correction? I believe, did we say accessory dwelling as part of that
Oh,
motion?
I'm sorry.
No.
Accessory structure.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
I'll second that motion.
All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. I can't hear anymore, but we're good.
Me neither.
All right, we will move along to item number 7. Item number 7 involves the address at 8109 Masonboro Sound Road, where a variance is being requested to allow for an accessory structure to be in front of the principal structure and to exceed the maximum number of accessory structures in the R15 residential district pursuant to City Code, Chapter 18, Land Development Code, Section 18-199. We'll welcome you back for this one.
This is my last one. Good afternoon again. We have property 8109 Masonboro Sound Road. The subject property is located on Masonboro Sound Road. The site contains approximately 100,827 square feet, or 2.3 acres, and it contains a single dwelling structure that is approximately 3,292 square feet that was constructed circa 1976. Currently, the site also contains 3 accessory buildings, with one being a well house that is located in the front of the principal structure. The total gross floor area of all 3 accessory structures totals approximately 1,453 square feet. The variance request is for a single-story accessory structure totaling approximately 490 square feet and will be set back from Masonboro Sound Road approximately 300 feet, but located in front of the primary structure. The total gross floor area of all existing and proposed accessory structures does not exceed the gross floor square footage of the primary structure. Section 18-199, accessory buildings and structures states that within the setbacks, the structure shall not be set in front of the principal building. Additionally, Section 18-199 states that the maximum number of accessory structures and buildings shall be 2. On January 31st, 2023, planning staff accepted an application for a variance allowing a 400, there's a typo. A 400 and the staff report says 470, but at number 4, it says that it should have been 490, so I want to make a correction there. A 490 square foot accessory structure to be located in front of the principal building. The applicant revised the variance request submitted on February 24, 2023, includes a request to exceed the permitted number of accessory structures on an R15 residential lot. The applicant states that the topography in the rear of the property is too low, and if it allowed the additional structure in the front of the principal building, it would not be visible from Masonboro Sound Road. Additionally, the applicant states that the size of the property lends itself to an additional structure. The applicant has also proposed to remove the existing well house that is currently located in front of the principal structure, such that the total of number of accessory structures would still be 3. This matter is set for hearing today, March 16, 2023. The case is subject to the 4 findings of fact, and I would like to submit all material in this presentation into record. The applicant is present for questioning, and staff is able to answer questions as well.
All right. Does anyone have questions right now?
Do you know how big the well house is that he's proposing to remove?
The well house, and I would have to defer to the applicant on that one. When we did our totals, it's not, was it an 8x8 structure? So it's roughly an 8x8 structure, and the applicant also indicated that it's not used anymore. That it's just there.
Does anyone, any additional questions right now? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and, if the applicant would like to come up.
Yes. This is a unique...
And just for the, I'm sorry.
Brian Campbell at 8109 Masonboro Sound Road in Wilmington, 28409. This is a lot, about a 2.5 acre lot off of Masonboro Sound Road down near, if anybody knows where Whiskey Creek Trail Pub is. It's at the end of the road. It's a house that is not far from a house where my wife and I previously lived, and drove by this house probably 100 times, 250 times a day, seems like. and never even knew it was there until we saw a real estate sign posted, and we followed this gravel driveway down to the end, and sure enough, there's a house back there. And lucky us, we got a 1976 farmhouse to fix up, so yay. So it had two primary structures on it, the house, and then behind that, we call it the barn, which has some power, but it does not have water or sewer facilities. And then there's a shed back there that's listed, which it's a 1910 old shed. That's one of the accessory units now on there, and it's not really used for anything, but it's from at least the first known survey or picture of the lot in 1910 has that shed on it. So I'm certainly not the one who's gonna come along and tear it down now. If it made it through all those hurricanes, it's gonna stay. But the purpose of today is I'm an attorney who works remotely from home, to get a structure up front on the lot, so I can have running water and sewer out of the basically an office and a workshop. But if you can see the property, we submitted a couple different maps. If there was a way to get them, the one, I guess, as I'm looking at it on my screen in the upper left corner, I'll clarify that it's not 3 lots, but that happened to be a survey that was done by the prior owner, and it just seemed like the easiest one to use to identify where the structure would go, right there where it says lot number 3. But the bottom one is the accurate single lot, 2.5 acres, all the way from front to back, where the structure would fit in behind that second row of trees, kind of right in the heart of on the lot. And again, it's a house, and I did have some camera pictures, but I didn't get them submitted with the materials. But again, it's a narrow lot all the way back. The house sits approximately 500 feet. The main structure sits approximately about 500 feet from the road, so you can't even see it. And we don't expect you'll be able to see this structure either, because of the row of trees. And in front of that, which is not listed very well, is a whole host of other shrubs and bushes. They call them spider trees, a bunch of spider trees and bushes and everything else along in the front there. So not expecting to be able to see it. And part of the reason for the variance, and you're talking about, when we looked at the variance that we would need, we first looked at getting the back barn set with water and sewer. Because of where it's at and the distance that the sewer line would have to go all the way to the road and getting water to it, the financial quote that they gave us was in excess of $100,000, which seemed pretty crazy. But given the distance to the road, given the water access, and of course the sewer, it was probably also a matter of the job was too small for a lot of people to handle, and if they quoted it a certain amount, then it would be worth it. But it was so, for everybody that came out, to get everything out there to the road with the sewer and the water, it was just too expensive. So that's the reason, the necessity to put something out front where it's already got access to the water and sewer. So that's why the need to be out front, because we just I can't afford to do anything in the back because of the distance from the road, and the need for the structure, the additional structure. It can just be explained to the extent that we currently have 3 structures. One is a pump house, not a whole lot bigger than this, but it's probably 8 by 8 with small roof. I think it's probably the roof itself is about 5 feet tall. To basically, in theory, replace that structure with a bigger structure. And then, of course, the third structure is the shed that is from 1910 or older, so. And again, this unit would be at least 300 feet back, probably closer to 350, maybe 400, but the tree line is 300, so it would be behind that. So I think that explains, the dilemma we're in, so, questions?
I have one for you. So if, say something happens to the shed, the 1910 shed, and if something was granted variance, are you good with that could not be built back, that you couldn't exceed 3?
Yeah, my wife wants it gone now, but I just haven't got around to working on that.
Okay. I just looking at like
Yeah.
where numbers are, and I'm not saying that that's what's going to go, because you have to do the 4 findings. But
No, there would be, if for some reason a hurricane came along and the 1910 shed didn't make it, there's no intention and no plan to replace it.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? All right, thank you. We'll, guess move on to the evidentiary hearing to see if there's any parties that would like to provide information related to this matter.
Hello?
All right, sir, if you could state your name and address for.
My name is Glenn Blackburn. I'm owner of 1020 Big Bay Drive, which is property immediately adjacent to the applicants. And nice to meet you for the second time only. Howdy, neighbor. I purchased a home 4 years ago, around about the same time I think Mr. Campbell purchased the home, which of course the ordinances are in place. And part of the appeal, if we could bring
Sir,
back.
if I can make sure that you talk into the microphone.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Can we bring back up that aerial picture, the satellite? Oh, yeah. So I don't know if you could point where my property is on there. Down, up, to the right there. So the appeal for the property that I have is
Yeah, we
Excuse me.
have trouble hearing you.
Is a great view of that tract of land, right? And I believe the plans are to put this building right there in front of the home. So my statement here today is just that I would oppose the application for that reason. It would impact my aesthetical view. A workshop there, there's sound, there's light coming into, got the back deck, the back screen imports, the kitchen, the living room, the upstairs master, another bedroom and bathroom that would be impacted by the structure. And my request is for the variances to not be approved and for the view to stay the way that it is.
All right.
That's it.
All right, okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that'd like to present any information? All right, is there anything you will get a chance to rebut if I just want to make sure anything additional city-wise?
I'll just add a little bit of context to this. Within the Masonboro Sound area, there's a National Register Historic District. Several years ago, we amended the city code to allow accessory dwelling units in front of the principal structure within that National Register Historic District because we recognized that there was a development pattern of, homes fronting the waterway and these long, deep lots. This property is located outside of that historic district, but it is in the general vicinity, just to put that into context.
All right, thank you. Mr. Campbell, do you want to come up and?
I guess I'm more in a rebuttal of the view that my neighbor's talking about. Between his house and my lot is a 6 or probably, it stands vertically about an 8-foot 8-foot fence, and between the fence and where their structure is, I've got trees. I mean, it's hard to even get in and out of there. But there's trees and there's structures and bushes and everything. So the view that he's got right now is my fence. And this would be a single-story unit. So I'm not sure what it would be blocking other than a view of my grass. So I'm not sure on that. I would, again, because the other option to this is I can build something that is out front of the house as long as there's a breezeway, as I'm told or learned. So that would be the other option, is to build along to the breezeway, but then that compacts everything into basically eliminates a front yard. So again, we would ask for a variance.
All right, thank you. Any questions while we're still in the public of the city regarding, is it okay for the person to come back up then? We haven't closed the public hearing, so I guess you can, yeah, I just wouldn't, sorry. It's, like I said, I'm just, I am a pain, I know it, but, yes, sir.
Just in response, there is a fence. My house is on a crawl space, so that's not entirely true that there's I'm looking at a fence, and definitely for the upstairs items that I mentioned, the master and the other bedroom and the bath, the fence is not going to hide any structure there.
Okay.
Question for you.
Sir, I think there's a question for.
You just heard what the applicant said, right? So I just want to, if we deny the variance and he decides to build a code within standard with a breezeway, is that right, Ms. Thurston?
Yes, sir.
Just to be clear.
I'm clear. I'm not trying to
Okay.
fight the law.
So he'll be
I'm just
able
saying
to
that-
build a building with a breezeway that's bigger.
Hey, if he wants to move the house in front and build behind it, it'd be the same thing. So yeah, I'm with you. I'll follow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody have any other information to add or questions of staff while we're still in the public hearing? All right, we'll go ahead, not public hearing, sorry, evidentiary hearing. We'll go ahead and close that hearing. And any additional information from the city or from the applicant? All right, well, what is the wish?
I went and looked at the property, and it is hard to see it from, well, anything from really Masonboro. But I struggle a little bit on this one with the 4 findings of fact.
Same.
I mean, it's more of a, I would like to do this than it really is meeting the 4 findings of fact.
Anybody?
I do as well. Can you throw them up, please, Casey, the 4?
Anyone want to make, if they're motion for or approval or non-approval?
I mean, I could see certain things. It's a skinny lot, it's a historic lot.
Almost a historic lot.
Almost a historic lot. But again, if you look at, I'm looking at the city, like, it will not be in front of the primary structure. Like, it's pretty clear. And given that there's other impacts, that's going to be hardship, I'm struggling with it.
And there is a remedy to comply, which is the breezeway. I have a hard time fitting this variance request into the 4 findings of fact.
And I mean, in it, if the shed comes down, then you could rebuild over. Maybe I should have asked that question when we were in the public side. But
You can, I believe, still ask questions of staff.
But so it came up, so if the old shed comes down, you would be able to build the accessory structure.
That is correct. He could
right.
rebuild in the same footprint so long as it's done within 180 days of
So it
the
would have to stay
demolition.
the same 8 by 8. It couldn't.
You can even have it larger. You just can't create new nonconformities.
Okay, that's where I thought, but I wanted to verify that.
That's
on
correct.
that, so.
It would have been also, normally there's more evidence here, like the applicant would have, you're claiming it's expensive, like you say you got quotes, we don't see the quotes. There's no imagery of what you're, other than that simple little floor plan.
Do we know if this isn't in a floodplain, is it?
No, sir.
So it's not too low.
So Catherine, you said if the well house comes down, a new structure can be built that's larger.
As long as it doesn't create new nonconformities with respect to setbacks or anything like that. So yes.
But we wouldn't be. I mean, if he moved this over to where the well house is, he's going to be building back in the existing footprint, and the well house is gone, and it would not be creating a new nonconformity. There'd still be 3 accessory structures. It would just be a larger structure, which is allowed, correct?
That may be a solution for the applicant.
So, 2 solutions to me that have been presented would be a breezeway, or to remove the well house and move the proposed office over to where the warehouse is and just build it there, correct?
I do believe that that would be a viable option for the applicant. I haven't looked very closely at the proposal, but we'll definitely work with him, should the board choose not to grant the variance, to figure out other ways that he can comply with the code.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think there are ways to comply with the code without granting a variance, and it appears we may have 2 options now, a breezeway or to move it over to the side where the well house is.
Yeah, I'm prepared to make a motion if you're all good with it. I'll make a motion to deny the variance just based on the 4 finding of facts. I don't see necessarily unnecessary hardship because there are alternative solutions. The property owner knew well and good what kind of property he was getting, so not necessarily any unique conditions. And it does not comply with the spirit and purpose of the LDC. So I would make a motion to deny.
All right, there is a motion to deny the variance. Is there a second?
A second.
All right, motion to second. We'll take a vote. All those in favor of the motion to deny the variance, say aye. Aye. Anyone in, it's actually unanimous, is it, am I correct?
Yes.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to item number 8. Item number 8 involves the address of 906 South 8th Street and 718 Dawson Street. The variance is, we're requesting a variance to the driveway location within the urban mixed-use district pursuant to code, chapter code 18, land development code section 18-4 and 18-340 subsection A. And we'll welcome you to make your presentation.
All right, last one.
Thank you.
The subject property consists of 2 vacant parcels zoned urban mixed-use district. The owner plans to recombine them into a single parcel and install site improvements generally consistent with the UMX zoning district. Land Development Code Section 18-340A-3E states driveway shall not be located along a designated primary frontage if the site also has non-primary street or alley access. Land Development Code Section 18-43.3 designates Dawson Street as a primary frontage street, and South 8th Street is considered non-primary frontage. On February 1st, 2023, planning staff accepted an application for a waiver from Section 18-340A-3E to allow an egress-only driveway connection along Dawson Street. The applicant states that this standard would prevent the provision of parking spaces, therefore negatively impacting traffic along Dawson Street with parallel parking and unloading. The applicant further states that the 92-foot lot width on South 8th Street is not sufficient to support a functional building, 2-way drive aisle, and parking stalls. This matter is set for hearing for the Board of Adjustment today, March 16th. This case is subject to the 4 findings of fact, which you are aware. I ask that this presentation and all materials be submitted to the record. I'm available for any questions, and the applicant is here as well.
Anybody have any questions to start out with? All right, thank you. All right, with the applicant.
Hey,
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Luke Menas with Stroud Engineering at 102D Cinema Drive. I'm the author of the site plan we're looking at right now. I've also got the property owner and developer, Mr. Rodney Williams, behind me, and he may step up to answer some questions if needed. But just to add on to what staff was saying, Mr. Williams bought the property, and it's two parcels. I think it was purchased in 2019 and 2020 with the intent of building something that resembles what you're looking at. The desire was to provide some amount of on-site parking to cater to folks that didn't feel comfortable parking on the street, whether it was with young kids, ADA accessibility needs, or just unloading. We got some loading spaces designated on there, and feel like while the ability to provide the UMX product without any parking on site is a nice option to have, I feel like in that particular location on Dawson Street, it affects the marketability of the place. And I'm going to defer to Mr. Williams if we need to get into the marketability stuff, because that's outside of my wheelhouse. But I do understand as an individual looking at it that it's more desirable to have some ability to park near your unit under certain circumstances. So I will run through some of these findings of fact and just some notes I have on them, and feel free to stop me with any questions. So unnecessary hardship, and I think that mostly applies to the owner in terms of the hardship, but I'm going to run through a few other scenarios too. But Land Development Code prevents access onto that primary frontage, and the 92-foot lot depth is not enough to support a two-way driveway. So you either have no parking or you have a one-way route through there, as we've shown. So I feel like the inability to provide parking there is a hardship to the developer. If we do come forward with a plan that has no parking on site, I feel like that's a negative impact to traffic on Dawson Street. There are some parallel parking spaces available. The largest block is actually right there in front of our site, but it's probably room for about 3 cars to get in there. And when you got folks that are trying to stop in traffic on Dawson Street and execute a parallel parking movement, it's an issue for folks. That's a street that's, there's folks around Wilmington driving up and down that road, but there's also folks not from Wilmington driving up and down that road, because that's the first thing you get to when you get to town. So it's, if somebody's coming into town Friday evening on vacation and not prepared, all of a sudden you're rolling down a 6-lane road and there's somebody doing a parallel parking move right in front of you. And I feel like that's a hardship to the guy who's running into that. Certainly adequate parking around the corner, out of the way of traffic on 8th Street. A hardship that I see there is you've got folks with ADA accessibility needs, and however we're going to upgrade that corner crosswalk ramp as part of our site design, no matter what we do. You park on the side of the road there, and you're then blocked by the curbing. You've got to negotiate up the side of 8th Street into traffic to get back to this ramp. Again, it's doable. It's done all the time in urban settings where there's not another viable option, and we feel like in this case there is another viable option, and want to prevent folks with accessibility or even just baby strollers. That's a hardship on them if we can't provide this parking for them on site. So resulting from conditions that are peculiar to the property, size, location, and topography. It's a 92-foot deep lot. It's effectively 86 feet when you take out a 6-foot buffer on the side. Even if the buffer wasn't there, we don't have room for a two-way drive aisle with any parking off of it. So would love to have another 20 feet on the site to be able to have just a straight 24-foot wide drive aisle with parking spaces on either side. There's a parking lot at, I think it's 1020 Dawson. It's the church, forget the name of it. It's done exactly like we would have loved to have been able to do it with an additional 20 or 30 feet of property there, but that's just not in the cards. We're working in a finite footprint. It's best case scenario with a one-way drive aisle is what we've got. The third item, the hardship didn't result from actions taken by the applicant. He didn't subdivide it. It's not a parcel where he owned more land and sold some off and left himself with not enough to develop. And then also, he purchased the property in 2019, 2020, when I don't believe, and I'll ask staff chime in if this is not the case, I believe the code that was in force in 2020, you could still have a driveway out onto Dawson Street. So he purchased the property with this product in mind, in good faith, thinking he was going to be able to get this driveway fit in there with the little bit of land he was able to purchase. The code changed, and now he's just trying to find a way forward with what he's got. Right now, it sits as a vacant parking lot. It's been that way for at least as far back as I can see on Google aerials, to like the mid-'90s, early '90s, and no evidence it was anything of any significance much before that. There is already a driveway there at both locations where we're showing driveways. I think they're both full movement driveways. It's kind of hard to tell because they're a bit grown over at this point. So adding a driveway there is not going to change the landscape in that area. So again, purchased the property thinking that he was going to be able to come in with a building and utilize those existing driveways, or at least those driveway locations. And requested variance being consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. Again, purchased with the old ordinance in effect and intending to come forward with a product that was consistent with that land development code, and just missed out on the timing there. We're still going to be utilizing some on-street parking, to be sure. We've got 18 units, and I think there are 10 or 11 parking spaces now shown. I believe, again, I'll defer to staff to correct me if I'm out of line here, but I think the intent was to try to use some of the underutilized parking, on-street parking we have around Wilmington. So we are still doing that, and feel like the parking available along 8th Street is going to be utilized. I'd like to think there won't be too much parking going on Dawson, but at least 1 or 2 spaces are available there. The other thing, and actually I've meant to bring this up on the hardship, there's about 3 or 4 residences located just to our west along Dawson Street, and if you can ride out there today, I rode by on the way here, you can flip back through various aerial photos on Google Earth. In all of them, and today, there are 2 or 3 cars parked in front of those 3 or 4 residences. They don't have driveways. They utilize their on-street parking spaces, and one of those is visible on my site plan real well. Another one is just to the very left side of the screen. It's likely that if we don't have any off-street parking, that those are going to get utilized by the tenants of this proposed building, and then that leaves those folks that have been accustomed to parking right in front of their door on Dawson Street. I guess they're going around on 8th Street too and parking, because there's not a whole lot of those on-street parking spaces as you go west from our site. That's a hardship for them. Again, it's within the confines of what the current land development code is looking to do, is utilize more of that on-street parking, but day-to-day functionality of it, it's going to be impactful for some folks, and that would be those folks in this situation. The full movement driveways on Dawson Street as you come into town, there's an Exxon station, there's a funeral home, there's a urgent care clinic, and a Dollar General. Again, all of those are developed under the old code, but they do all have, they're all corner lots with frontage on secondary roads, as well as the Dawson Street frontage. All of them have full movement driveways on Dawson, full movement being right in, right out on a one-way street So what we're proposing is not out of character with what's already on Dawson up and down the street. It's not going to stick out like a sore thumb when you ride into town. You're going to see a new driveway, exit only, where there has been a driveway for many, many years, and it looks a lot like the other driveways that are on either side of it. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. If you've got any questions.
Did you ever say what this was going to be, what kind of structure this is going to be?
Mixed use, 18 apartment units, and then some commercial space for lease downstairs.
Does anybody have any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we will move into the evidentiary hearing, and I'll ask if there's anyone that would like to present any additional information. And not seeing any, we will ask, is there any question, anything additional from the city or staff?
Not at this time.
I have a quick question for staff. Is the driveway usage vested at all? Because, you know, there's two driveways. I went out there, and there is a driveway on Dawson, and there's a driveway on 8th. Is that vested, or is that's gone away with the code change?
The redevelopment would necessitate compliance with new code. It would not be considered vested.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions related to this? All right, we'll go ahead and close the evidentiary. And anything else from the applicant or related? Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry, got up slowly.
No worries.
My name is Rodney Williams. I live at 5103 Lancome Court, Wilmington, North Carolina, 28409. I am the property owner. As Luke mentioned, I bought this property in 2 tranches and kind of had this idea to develop this property in this nature. And as he said, I was kind of caught in the crosshairs of code change. I was born here, been developing and building here in Wilmington for about 30 years. We've done a lot of stuff around town, and you know, we my idea here was to provide affordable housing with a nice site plan that enhanced the thoroughfare in the neighborhood and provided people with a good quality place to live toward downtown. And so, as I understand, there's no parking required on site, but we just felt it was, from a marketing standpoint, convenience standpoint, and just an overall aesthetics of, a major thoroughfare coming into Wilmington, it would look a lot better than just having a huge building filling up this corner and flooding all the parking out on the street. And that was just kind of our idea behind it.
All right, does anybody have any questions for the applicant? Okay, all right, thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Go ahead and we'll close, and we will, what is the wish of?
Enhances safety. It's a small lot. I mean, it easily, the 4 findings of fact apply.
I agree.
Yeah, I went and looked at the property and drove through, and I just think that, it's got to be done that way, the way it's proposed, because I was hoping there was going to be some vesting of the driveway usage, because with no required on-site parking, it is going to just fill up Dawson and 8th to the detriment of the other people. And I think it is a safety issue. ADA accessibility was addressed, which I think is important. So I think it does meet the 4 findings of fact.
Yeah. And if that being, if there's anyone has any other questions or any other thing to say, I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the variance based on the 4 findings of facts. There would be unnecessary hardship. You push everybody out onto the street, reducing safety. There are conditions that are peculiar because it's small. We all know how Dawson is super busy, so therefore we're following the spirit and purpose and public safety. So I approve the variance.
All right, do I have a second for that?
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The variance is approved. We will move on to item 10, right?
We do have items from staff.
Well, we'll make those 9 subsection A.
Okay. You've gotten an email from Casey regarding training opportunities for the board. The School of Government will be here May 10th in Thalian Hall to offer quasi-judicial training. And if any of you are available to attend, we would certainly welcome that and be happy to pay your registration fee.
Yeah, and then I did both the online and the in-person prior to COVID. In-person is much better. So if you get the chance.
I agree.
It was like, I mean, it was okay online, but it was also online at 7:30 at night. This is a little bit better, but I do think the in-person one was pretty productive.
And Adam Lovelady, from what I understand, will be present. He is the one who wrote the article about hardship and when it's unnecessary that was referenced in one of our earlier items by Mr. Richardson. It'd be interesting to hear him speak on that as well.
All right.
So please follow up with Casey if you haven't already, and if you have, then I appreciate that.
Okay. All right. Anything else? I guess we're adjourned, right?